Frickin' years. I'm only 50. No, I'm just sitting. But
yeah, I've been at that point. Oh my gosh.
An extra $1 billion to make your neighborhood whole.
Oh, that's it. Good morning. How are you today?
Okay. Commissioner? Okay.
Saturday we were at Steamboat's.
We'll make it back up a mile or
Okay.
what?
Okay. Right. Okay. That works. I noticed that. Folks, I'm reasonably sure we have a quorum. If we can get you to the table, we'll count noses.
Very good. I promise not to say anything.
I am delighted.
I just got off the phone with Sam
I read enough of the article
Good morning.
to see what you did,
Exciting.
but didn't read far enough to see how long it took to do
I
it.
was on the council.
Yes. I don't know the answer to that. I think
Call the meeting to order. I am going to declare we have a quorum. We'll start with introductions, and to my left we have
Tyler Stevens, Green Mountain Falls.
Rob McDonald, PPACG. Darrell Glenn, El Paso County Commissioner.
Mark Dwalby, Park County Commissioner.
Noel Sawyer, City Council, Woodland Park.
Joel,
John
go
Shaw,
ahead.
Peterson Air Force Base.
Joel Miller, Colorado Springs City Council. Sorry.
General Rich Fogg, United States Air Force Academy. Rod Chisholm, Deputy Garrison Commander, Fort Carson.
Vicki McDonald, Mayor Palmer.
Wayne Williams, El Paso County Clerk and Recorder.
Mark Pfeiffer, and I'm here in my capacity as the Water Quality Control Commissioner for the Arkansas Basin.
Don Knight, Colorado Springs City Council.
Sally Clark, El Paso County Commissioner.
Sharon Johnson, Fountain City Council.
Norm Steen, Teller County Commissioner.
Andy Pico, Colorado Springs City Council. Dennis Heisey, El Paso County Commissioner. Going back to Rich.
Rich Muzzy, PPACG Environmental Program.
Jason Wilkinson, Policy and Communications. Greg Gasper, Transportation Director.
You know, let's go back to our audience there behind the post.
Jim Moore, Military Affairs Council. Bob Baker, CAC.
Dick Janitel, West Side Operators Group at the airport.
Andy Bianca, Airport Advisory Commission.
Dr. Chris Thornton, I'm Chairman of the Airport Advisory Commission.
Howell Lestis, Concerned Citizen. Walter Ernst, Concerned Citizen.
Neil Ralston, Interim Assistant Director for Planning and Development at the Springs Airport. Good morning, everyone.
I'm Castellara, Town and Monument.
Lisa Streisfeld, CDOT Region 2. Penny Pitt, CDOT Region 2. Kathleen Frager, Colorado Springs.
Dave Huxley. Richard Walker, First Properties. Howard Cohen, Signature Realty Capital. Larry Whitaker, Last York.
Morning, Mark Henry,
Dave Papa, CR Region 2. Andre Bracken, El Paso County.
James McMurray, Marcel Davis.
Jennifer Urban, El Paso County.
Stuart King, City of Colorado Springs.
Beverly Mass, PPACG Finance. One half, Colorado Springs Utilities.
Greg Risley, Carson Utilities.
Pam Ellis, Silver.
Bruce Birchfield, Coast Office.
Jeff Bond, Peterson Air Force Base, Public Information Officer.
Did we get everybody in the audience? We had some late arrivals here. Tom, for sure.
Tom Rona, CDOT Region 2 Director.
Who else might we have missed here at the table? Okay. Moving on to agenda approval. I am not aware of any changes.
Well, just one, perhaps, Mr. Chair, is we have to have a small correction on the minutes from last meeting. That'd be,
Okay. We'll get that under the consent items.
oh, I'm sorry, yes.
Item F.
Pardon me.
Do we have a motion to approve the agenda?
Move approval.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Item number 3 would be public comment. If any of you are here and would like to bring an item before this board that is not on today's agenda, this would be your opportunity to do so. We'd be happy to hear from you.
Can I ask a question?
Commissioner Clark.
Can I be considered a member of the public for just a moment?
Absolutely not.
I had forwarded on to everyone the Waters of the U.S. Designation, so I don't know when it's appropriate to discuss that, and I forgot to print it out. I probably have it on my iPad, but I really would like PPACG to take a position on that and send a letter to our Colorado delegation members.
Mark, do you have that in your report?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Okay.
And I will discuss it.
Thank you very
All
much.
right. Very good. Anyone else have an item they'd like to bring before the board? Seeing none, we'll move on to item number 4, which is our consent items. And we do have a correction apparently on 4F.
I do, Mr. Chair. Item 7D, Delta, bottom of page 3, the motion made by Sally Clark for the distribution of the RPP funding. I think that should be 50% for population, not 55, just a small correction.
Do we,
4E, is a correction on 4E. The map, the wrong map got put into the folder.
okay, before we go there, can we verify?
Yeah, the total there should be 50 for population, 35 for lane miles, and 15 for truck, for a total of 100%. Not, so, just small correction.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And then, Craig, what, on 4E?
The map shows, that's in there is, shows an area, I'll see if I can find it real quick.
Right?
Including the area down by Fort Carson, CDE, where are we at? There we go. And it should not be included this, at least at this time. Well, we can include it later. But this, our current boundary follows the interstate, and that's what we'd like to, the TAC and CAC's recommendation was following existing, not including this portion of, I guess, El Paso County and Fountain yet, because there's a grant application in, and it would send conflicting messages to have it in the MPO until the grant is decided. After that grant's decided, then we can go through and put it back in as part of the long-range plan.
Okay. Pardon? Sharon has to move. Yes, yeah, don't bring the tumbleweeds with you. Any other corrections? Yes, Commissioner Knight. Councilmember Knight.
Minutes, but I'd like to pull B and C off the consent item.
Okay. Do we have a motion to approve items A, D, E, F, G, and H with the corrections?
So moved.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Well, let's go to 4B. That would be our board policy clarification on the expiring MOU. Rob McDonald.
Sure. I can answer a question or just give a quick overview.
Well, yeah, let me express my concerns. Last June meeting back in 2013, when the MOU expired, and as a board voted unanimously to have you, the staff, continue to work on trying to get a new MOU, even though we knew it wasn't going to happen, because in the message we were seeing, from our what I read from the package and then announced, we read from that, and the reason for the release is so we can get the 2000, whatever, the 2040 numbers. I don't see why we need to stop trying to get an MOU to get the 2040 numbers. To me, they seem to be exclusive, and I don't want to stop trying to get an MOU where we can identify our shares unless when we do that, OB makes that OBE, but that one's going to be back.
What we put on the consent, based on a variety of discussions, including the executive committee. Of course, the executive committee, the officers, they can't change the board policy. So you see the current policy, and Councilman, you're exactly right. The policy was send the signed agreement extension to CDOT. They didn't sign it. And so the staff recommendation that we put in here, when we get and there, let me just recap those, one of which we think the board, and again, it's a question of the board, not to pursue an MOU agreement. There's no reception on CDOT or the commission to do an MOU of this sort anymore. So that's what we're hearing. Again, we're asking you to confirm that or clarify that. Second piece is talking about the 2040 long-range plan numbers. Every time we do a long-range plan, the state, they give us all the estimates, and we call that reasonably expected income from every funding category, federal, state, and then we ask the local governments for all your categories. We ask transit, all their funding estimates through 2040. So when we look at those numbers from the state, and they come by categories, we can then compare the state total of whatever that is. I'll say $1.2 billion a year. I made up a number. And then we can have the board look at some of these categories, take the aggregate, and say, here's how much is reasonably expected over that time frame, either in 6-year time frames, annual time frames, or the whole plan, and ask the board to look at, is that total estimate reasonable to put in our long-range plan? And we can calculate the number, and not compared to an MOU or anything, but probably more compared to other proxies like population, vehicle miles traveled, vehicles registered, lane miles, and probably 4 or 5 different measurements of how much money is put in by this region, and through the gas tax, both federal and state, also vehicle registration fees. So no one knows exactly how much gas tax is paid because it's not a collected number. So you look at those proxies to say how much money we think an estimate goes into the system, how much are we getting back in all the categories, and we'll ask the board, is that reasonable for the board to put in your 2040 plan? And if it's not, then future policy discussion can happen. But what we're hearing and sensing as a staff is the MOU won't be re-signed by the state. So let's go after the dollars in our long-range plan, and eventually it'll come down to a 6-year plan of what we have for all the funding categories that we hear about, whether it's federal, metro, or regional priority program, that RPP, as 2 examples. So that's our proposal to the board, is look at that dollars in versus dollars out in the long-range plan, which is happening over the next few months, versus spending the time doing more work on an MOU that we don't think the CDOT staff will be directed to comply.
You could actually kind of do both. You can have the MOU, you can have the offer still out there hanging, and as we said last June, it is still sending a statement that we believe we are not getting our fair share, and we want to put something down in writing. And it was a 2-part. If the MOU wasn't signed, and we knew the MOU wasn't going to be signed, we gave you other direction that also voted to carry unanimously to try and go work on something that does. So and it sounds like, regardless of whether we do that or not, this other avenue of getting the 2040 numbers and finding out if they're realistic and everything else will still happen. And whatever the results of that, if it's not reasonable, it can give more ammunition to our MOU, or it can say, well, we're de facto approving the MOU anyway. But, from a sending a signal, I don't want to withdraw the MOU and say, okay, you didn't sign it, we're, all's forgiven.
Sure. And again, it's a question for the board. Where do you want to go with this? And I know CDOT's here, but our Transportation Commissioner is not. His advice is the MOU will not be signed by the state. A new framework, the original estimate for those 2040 numbers was due last November. And so we thought that was going to be the discussion to have around, if not an MOU, a framework, whatever that form takes. That obviously didn't happen. The 2040 numbers now are estimated by CDOT to be given to us probably next month, which is really late in our 2040 plan process. But whatever the board decides, we'll take that direction.
Commissioner Clark?
Well, I was just, and I don't think that Dr. Cogg's going to get an MOU either. I think this is a general statement that there probably are not going to be. I see Tom Rona saying, yeah, I guess the no meant yes, essentially, that there's not going to be one. So I think to Councilman Knight's point, just basically, even if we were to write a letter saying we want to be partners with the state, we want to help develop the new framework. I don't know, Rob, if you've already done that in a very in a way that says we want to be at the table. We want the seat at the table to work on this going forward, and we understand that a memorandum of understanding probably is not in the future here, but we certainly would like some assurance that there's going to be a process to which we can be assured that we will work on getting, if you want to say just for discussion necessarily, not necessarily in the letter, but something about our fair share of the dollars that are provided from our region to the bigger pot and get that return on investment, essentially.
And
I don't know if Councilman Knight would feel better if we did some sort of a more formalized letter or something like that, but the likelihood of us unfortunately getting an MOU reinitiated isn't going to happen. So at least that's what I'm told.
Sure, and obviously we've talked to our friends at Dr. Cog. They're very similar to where you are. They were very clear. They would let the MOU expire last June and said they want a similar type discussion. We said framework. They said a fiscal discussion, and that is we're waiting for. If you have a numerator and a denominator in the calculation, we're waiting for the numerator. We don't, and Dr. Cog and North Front Range, Pueblo, and Grand Junction, the metropolitan planning organizations, there are 5 in the state. We're all waiting for that number from last November, or the numbers by category, so we can decide if we are in the ballpark of any number. And so that process, CDOT's agreed to sit down and do that with all the MPOs, including us. So I think the process is there. I don't think we need a letter or resolution. We just need the numbers. And until we get those, we honestly can't say, are we getting return on investment? Because we have no number to calculate. The last number we calculated about a year ago with CDOT, and CDOT calculated the number. They did it for the years 2012 backwards, 6 more years. And that number was the number many of you have heard. The difference between the expired MOU and those 6 years was a delta of $188 million for this region. So that's gone. So we had the numbers that CDOT calculated. We agreed, provided that to the board, and that was it. That was the end of that discussion. So as we look for the next years, 2013 through 18, you've all heard us say there's a discrepancy in what was allocated in your tip versus the reality, and that delta is.
We agree. You're getting into the weeds. We agree that we have some differing numbers depending on whose books you look at that need to be resolved. But on back to the MOU, not only did the motion, as you correctly stated, pass unanimously, did it say offer this MOU, but it instructed staff to pursue it. And what we have found is pursuing it tends to be counterproductive for us. I am more than happy to have an MOU offer standing out there Even though I think it will take the other forms that you've heard about here, but that's kind of what brought this back to the agenda was the pursuing of the MOU was not working in our favor in terms of all the other projects we had going. Clerk and Recorder Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And now that I can count better, I see Commissioner Clark is not in her usual seat, so it confuses me.
Important people were over there, so.
I'm just saying, you get used to things after a few years on this board. Maybe the way to address this is to tweak the wording a little bit, because I agree. Continuing to pursue actively something if the other party has no willingness to enter it doesn't do much good. So I don't know if inserting the word actively, the board not pursue actively the creation, would resolve things. I throw that as a possibility. I will note there are a number of formulas, all of which are much better for us when you want to talk about comparators than the MOU, because the MOU is a compromise that had PPACG funding the rest of the state. And if we went with population or vehicle registration or even the new RPP formula that the Commission is likely to adopt, all those, I think, have us coming up better than the MOU formula, which was a compromise to try to get us up from where we had been in the past. But so maybe it's inserting the word actively, or maybe it's just phrasing it differently. But if the other side said they don't want an agreement, and that's pretty clear they have, then continuing to pursue it actively doesn't seem to make a lot of productive sense. We tried.
Councilmember Knight.
This was come on a consent calendar. Obviously, it's not going to get unanimous. Can we take some of these recommendations and come back and bring it as a discussion item next week, next month, or do we just vote up and down today?
I would certainly be willing to entertain a motion to continue this and ask staff to work with CDOT and our STAC members to bring back a recommendation as to what to replace it with.
So moved.
So the motion is to continue this for 30 days with that direction. Commissioner Clark?
A suggestion as we bring this back next month, I think that's a great idea, but I would like to see if Rob could draft just a statement, letter, whatever, to bring back for consideration that basically talks just briefly about the history of where we got here and asking for a more formalized seat at the table as we continue these discussions so that it memorializes our intent. I will point out, too, that I realize that maybe sometimes we don't see, I'm not sure what fair share means. If we talk to some of the rural counties, I think they could probably make the similar, they could make similar comments as they're not getting their fair share, or maybe they're getting their share of our share. I don't know, but we have to do this. This is about the state, too, as a whole. We drive on roads. City folk drive on county roads, county people drive on city roads. It all fits together. So we've got some significant projects moving forward, and so I don't want to give the impression that, beggars can't be choosers. We really need to work as a region. So in a nice way, Rob, if you could bring a letter back at the next one, I'd like that to be proposed next month as we meet and talk about this again.
Just to clarify, you're thinking a proposed letter to the state?
Yes.
Okay. And
so that it kind of memorializes, I think, what Councilman Knight was getting at, of feeling uncomfortable that we aren't getting something a little more formal proposed.
We will frame it up for the board, and the transportation, we'll try to sneak it through the committees, too. We'll walk on tomorrow to the Transportation Committee. Well, they meet tomorrow.
Oh.
And so, yeah, they don't have it for a week, but I think, I know some of our TAC members are in the audience. So here's a warning for our TAC members, and CDOT's there. So maybe they'll have some ideas of what's the proper framework to put in that letter to say we request the following, and we'll bring it back to the board for next
I
month.
also think that we should thank CDOT for their support that we've gotten on many of our projects as well. So I think that that's important.
Sure. Will do.
Commissioner Dwalaby, last word before we vote.
I want to just echo something Sally said, that this is a statewide thing. And I ran into real conflict between our last meeting and the stack meeting. And when you read your line and you see what your percentage is, and you go across, and it goes from 18 to 19%, oh, that's a good thing. But at what cost? Where's that 1% coming from? And it's coming from Region 5, I believe. And they're bigger, and they have less money, and it's a mountainous area, and they have to remove snow that a lot of the other areas don't have the expense of removing. And it's not my region, but I have to think of this, I mean, we're a statewide board, and Colorado Springs isn't an island. You know, it's attached to the rest of the state. And as Dennis said, he was up through my part of the state a few days ago, and you know, as he was driving through that little skinny bit of a road we have there, and all those cars have to go on that one road. And I know Region 2, we're part of Region 2, so we get more money. So I should say, yeah, give us more money. But what about those people in the mountains that don't, that are getting a bigger region with less money? And you have to think about that, too. It's not just population. It's where does the population go and where do the tourists go that bring money into our state. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. With that, I'll call the roll. All those in favor of the continuance, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item 4C, Title VI and Limited English Proficiency Plans. Rob, do you want to, well, let's see if we have a question before we have a...
Question, reading this, at least my packet did not have the Title VI plan or the English Proficiency Plan, just had the resolution that we're approving them. So is this something that we crafted? Or is this something that is a state one that we're just signing on to?
Yeah.
You know, you're asking me to approve a plan, but you're not giving me the plan or the history of it.
Sure.
So
Yolanda will have some of the details of what we had. I think the intent, there was a link in the memo that would link right to those plans. In our attempt to save paper, sometimes we don't print out the dozen pages of different documents. It was in your packet, I believe, last month as well.
And we did hear about this last month.
Yes.
Yolanda was
It was
here.
an information item, and usually we do 30-day information and then action for this month to allow 30 days of reading.
okay, then my bad.
But
But let me ask, is this a required program?
Yes, it is.
Thank
And
you.
normally what we do when it's information first, we include the whole, whether it's 30 pages or 50 pages, we include it the first time. And then the second time when it's going for action, then we just include the link. So you don't have to print all those papers out. So, and yes, it is a required item.
Okay, I stand corrected. There is a link. I just didn't realize that was a hyperlink.
Understand.
it's good to check.
Do we have a motion to approve?
Move approval.
Second?
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. That brings us to item number 5 and our reports. And as Rob pointed out during agenda prep, he thinks every committee, standing committee we have met. So we will have many reports, and I would ask our folks to just hit the highlights based on time constraints or time management. Rob, you're first up.
Sure, I'll show you. I'll lead by example with time management. Sorry, I'm not going to say stand as written. First item I wanted to point out for the board. You heard our audit report last month. One of the points that our independent auditor brought up, and Commissioner Clark brought up too, to make sure we really deal with the Nutrition Services Incentive Program, or NSIP. On my report, as an attachment, the letters that were missing last year, we have the letters for this year. So what I told the board last month, that either our new chocolate software will catch these, or we'll go old school and print them. These are the letters, so it will not be an audit point next year, because these are the letters that we're looking for. So I want to make sure that the board saw those. They also, as some of the Colorado Springs City Council members, I presented to them on the regional prioritization process of what we go through, so I did that Monday, so I won't go too much on that, but you're going to hear more about that today in our long-range plan and TIP amendments. It's really how we prioritize projects, or the board prioritize projects. Also under transportation, Craig and I are involved with 10 states that are doing something under a SHARP 2 strategic highway project that Federal Highways gave to Phoenix. And so as a partner, Council of Governments or Association of Governments, they're working on a better way to streamline information and use things in our planning process. So the Phoenix Association of Governments is leading it, but we got all of our peers in 10 states that we're talking to try to get the best data, best practices. So I thought I'd point that out, that not only deal with in Colorado, but we're all over the West trying to figure out how to do prioritization, how to get the data and make things as streamlined as possible. Also, there was a monthly coordination meeting with CDOT, county, city, and PPACG to go over some of the key projects and things coming up. So a lot of that's on your agenda. Also, Craig and I met with CDOT staff, and some are in the audience today, going over what we refer to as, or they refer to as, cash management and the TIP and the STIP, and how we're trying to get those all to match up and make it understandable. And so there will be follow-up actions that the board will get in the next probably month or two as we figure out some of those numbers and why there are discrepancies. And finally, on the audit line, Bev introduced herself, Bev Majewski, and the other admin staff. We've been working with the PPRTA auditors. And so we have auditors a lot in the building. They're done and gone, and we'll get their report later. But it's one of the activities we do as a contract to the PPRTA. So that's my report. Any questions?
Questions for Rob? Thank you. 5B would be our Transportation Advisory Committee. Tom Kasawara.
Good morning. I'll try to be as quick as Rob. At our last TAC meeting, we recommended approval of the Title VI and Limited English Proficiency Plans, which you have just approved. We had a rather lengthy discussion on TIP Amendment number 18, which is not on your agenda. We had another workshop on that after the meeting. There are some unresolved issues with that TAC wants to talk about with PPACG staff, and it is on our agenda tomorrow at our monthly TAC meeting. We also recommended approval of TIP Amendment 16, which has impact on the Fillmore project. We recommended that you approve the amendment by following the city's proposal with contingency that the PERTA board approves $1 million on the Fillmore project. We had a majority vote on that. We were not unanimous, but we were close. It was 5-1. TIP Amendment 17 is also on your agenda today. That was recommended for approval unanimously. Census urbanized area boundary adjustments, you already approved that. We unanimously recommended that you do. Regional Transportation Plan evaluation criteria weighting, we had our results. You now have the TAC results and the CAC results and the combination of the two that staff has, and that is on your agenda today. And the 2040 Regional Transportation Plan call for projects. The application deadline is June 19th, and that is on your agenda for discussion as well. I think I'm done.
Questions for Tom? Thank you. Community Advisory Committee, Bob Baker.
Good morning. I, too, will be brief. Thank you for your consent agenda appointment of Vince Rusnak to our committee. He will enhance our committee quite a bit. Also, your appointment of Baker. I can now serve out my term. We reviewed and recommended everything that was proposed to us, as you can see in your paperwork. We had substantial discussion concerning TIP Amendment number 16. It was not a unanimous vote, but approval was granted. Our concerns were around governance issues, and were we doing something that was somebody else's business to do? That's basically what it was. We had a pre-meeting workshop concerning project evaluation criteria weighting. It was most productive, allowing our meeting discussion on the topic to move effectively to resolution. It wasn't that way the last time we went through that, and as you can see from the notes that you have, there's a really good proximity between what the CAC did and what the TAC did. So that's also a good sign. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Regional Advisory Council, Bill Gamble.
Good morning, everyone. Too will be brief. One thing that was not in your packet that's been handed out is this sheet with budgetary figures. You'll see that we received our allocation of $3.635 million for this coming year, and we, Guy, Rob, and I are going to Maui this weekend to see how to distribute that. Our technical review committee is in the process right now of reviewing the proposals from all of our providers, so we'll be distributing that money. This represents about almost $500,000 more than we got last year. We're going to use about $150,000 of that to work with our providers to allow them to establish collaboration and other agreements with other agencies that will help them to become more efficient. We have that opportunity now to serve more seniors if they can establish those kinds of relationships, and we're going to use that amount of money to try to spur that on. That is our report is in your packet. If you have questions about anything else, I certainly can address them. I would like to draw your attention to the numbers of folks. So we had 37 people at our last RAC meeting from all three of our counties. That just shows you the interest that we have in providing support for our seniors. So it's a good number from all over the three counties that we serve, Park, Teller, and El Paso. So if you have questions about anything else on the report.
Commissioner Clark.
I was just wondering, and I appreciate having the information about the dollars that are being distributed, but I don't see, and maybe I missed it, kind of a list of how we've distributed those with all of our different partner agencies in the different counties. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if you have that now or if you can provide that to us.
We can provide what was done last year, but again, as I said, just yesterday, our review committee was reviewing the proposals for this allocation, and when that's done, we can show you who got what.
That will come back to us at the next, will that be at the next board meeting?
We can have that next meeting, yes.
Yeah, I think it would just be appreciated to see how that's distributed to the various agencies around the three counties who are the partners on this, at this table.
Okay.
Thank you.
Other questions for Bill? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Mobility Coordinating Committee. Did Gail Nails make it? No report there this month. Item F would be the Arkansas Fountain Coalition for Urban River Evaluation. I don't know why that is such a mouthful, but
it's getting easier and easier for you to say, Dennis. The AFCURE meeting met on May 6th, and we talked about the data uploads for the nutrients requirements for Regulation 85. All the data uploads were completed in April, and this was contracted out to the Colorado Data Sharing Network, and all those data uploads for the 11 AFCURE members have now been verified and entered into the Data Sharing Network database. And they talked about the contract for next year with the Colorado Data Sharing Network. We had a presentation by Brown and Caldwell regarding Waters of the U.S. proposal. I won't go much into that because I know Mark's going to go ahead and touch upon that. We also discussed the next steps white paper. I did a presentation similar to the one I did to the PPACG board, to the PPACG board last month. And we had a working group meeting to talk about the water quality issues and the development of monitoring locations and any data gaps and where exactly to go ahead and sample within the issue areas identified in the white paper. those were kind of the highlights for the after meeting.
Questions? Moving on to our Air Quality Technical Committee. Rich, you've got that one as well.
Yeah, Vicky could not be here, so I'll go ahead and do that. This was the second meeting that was held to go ahead and work on developing goals, objectives, and strategies for the AQTC to work on over the next 2 years and longer. I would like to mention these goals, objectives, and strategies are consistent with the federal and state laws. And one of the priorities that the members wanted to really focus on is the public outreach and education component, especially regarding ozone, and also public prevention. We will be having another meeting to further discuss and evaluate these strategies.
Questions? Thank you. And now for probably our first report, or at least our first report in a long time, on Colorado Water Congress Water Quality Committee. Mark Pfeiffer.
Thank you. I just wanted to...
Mark, there we go. We've got a mic.
Okay, I want to update you on a few significant issues that are being watched by the Water Quality Control Commission and the state in general. The first one I'll turn to is the Waters of the U.S. rulemaking proposal that was recently published in the Federal Register by EPA and the Corps of Engineers. What this rulemaking is about, really, is what is federal water and what isn't, what falls within the exclusive purview of the state or local governments. And the reason for the rulemaking is there was uncertainty, if you will, attached to some recent Supreme Court decisions about how far EPA and the court could go in asserting jurisdiction. In fact, the Supreme Court sort of scaled back that jurisdiction to some extent. In response, EPA and the Corps issued some guidance, and they received thousands of comments on the guidance, many of which were either negative or people saying this is too important an issue to address through guidance. You need to go to formal Administrative Procedure Act rulemaking at the federal level. And so they eventually withdrew the guidance and now publish this rulemaking. Why is it important to us? Well, if the waters fall under federal jurisdiction, then you need a 402 discharge permit to discharge anything into those waters from a point source. For example, all our wastewater facilities have point source discharge permits. Anything that would be discharged into Fountain Creek as an example. You also need a 404 dredge and fill permit from the Corps of Engineers if it's federal jurisdiction. And maybe more importantly, from a time and cost perspective, if you trip 404, there's a very good chance you'll be in the NEPA review process. And NEPA, as most of us know that have done projects, is very expensive and very time-consuming. So it has some significant potential impacts. Under the proposed rule, which is out there for 90 days comment, EPA would now define waters of the United States in a way that they've similarly been defined in the past, but there's some expansion in the minds of most people of that scope of jurisdiction. So all interstate waters or traditional navigable waters and wetlands would be federal or under the federal purview. All tributaries to those waters would be under the federal purview per se. In other words, historically, on tributaries, as you got further and further up in the watershed, oftentimes you did a case-by-case analysis to see if they had any real impact or effect. Now, if it's tributary, it's per se federal. All impoundments of tributaries or traditional navigable waters, like our reservoirs in Colorado, are federal. All adjacent water bodies to tributaries or traditional navigable waters are now per se federal, and that includes a new concept called neighboring. And neighboring is defined to be within the floodplain or riparian zone. So any waters within the floodplain or riparian zone are now going to fall under the federal purview. And then there's this catch-all category at the end. They call it other waters, and this really relates back to what the Supreme Court called a significant nexus test. In other words, on a case-by-case basis, if you have isolated ponds or isolated wetlands, prairie potholes, etc., on a case-by-case basis, EPA and the court can determine whether or not they're federal, and do they have a nexus with traditional navigable waters or not. But the new twist now under the proposed rule is you can aggregate all of these isolated waters, if you will, within the watershed to determine if in total they'd have a significant impact, even though individually they would not. And so obviously this is going to garner a lot of comments and a lot of debate. It's a 90-day comment period, runs out July 21st, but a lot of people have already requested an extension of that. There was to have been a House hearing before the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee last Thursday. I was testifying as part of a panel before that committee. At the last minute, it was canceled due to the death of the former chairman of the committee. It's been rescheduled for June 11th. One of the points that I was going to make on behalf of Western water providers and Western dischargers is that we want EPA and the Corps not to lose sight of what I call the big picture when they define these waters of the United States and basically federalize the process. And that is, number one, we think the arid West is ground zero for the impact of the rule because we're the ones with the washes and the dry arroyos and the ephemeral and effluent-dependent stream system and the isolated water bodies, because that's just the way our geography and geology and hydrology works here. We're not wet ordinarily. And number two, we're also, we think, the focal point for drought and fires and then floods. And as a consequence of that, we're the ones that have to develop a lot of new infrastructure in the coming decades. New storage to deal with droughts, new delivery pipelines to, deal with water resource supplies, new, replaced infrastructure to deal with the consequences of fire and flood. And all this infrastructure will undoubtedly cross these dry arroyos and washes and intermittent water bodies, et cetera. If they're all federalized and we constantly trip on 404 permit needs and then have to go through the NEPA process, it's going to make it very difficult for us to respond in a timely fashion to meet these other needs of our population and the environment. A lot of these projects like groundwater recharge or joint use, joint conjunctive use of groundwater and surface water. These types of environmentally sensitive projects will wind up in the federal process, may be more costly and more time consuming. So that's sort of, in a nutshell, the point I wanted to make in my testimony and will make now on June 11th, which is the rescheduled date for the hearing. We did have an opportunity to go back to D.C., though, last week and meet with the Assistant Administrator for Water of EPA and just have a cross-the-table meeting with her and say, let's slow down here. Let's have a dialogue. We don't think that everything you're proposing is in any way erroneous, but there are some areas where we think we do need to have a more thoughtful approach and make some adjustments. And are you prepared to have a dialogue with Western water providers and dischargers? The answer was yes. We are willing to listen. We are willing to make some changes. Please provide us with your comments and your questions, because there's still uncertainty in this proposal. If you read it, which I've done once, it's 360 pages. I mean, there's a lot of detail associated with it. So there's difference. People can have different interpretations, if you will, of how it will actually be implemented. So in that regard, we're going through it. I work with the National Water Resources Association and the Western Urban Water Coalition, which are the major water utilities, if you will, in the West. We're going to probably have a concerted set of comments. There's also an effort by a D.C. firm that the Water Congress, Colorado Water Congress, is going to work with to get not only municipal entities, but also agricultural groups and industrial groups together on a set of comments and concerns so that we can work in a more coordinated fashion. So with that, like I said, a lot of letters have already gone in asking for an extension on the 90-day comment period, and I'm sure a lot of entities will be adopting position papers and resolutions on the topic.
Commissioner Clark.
Well, I did forward on the talking points with regard to impact on counties to the PPACG board, but I wanted to just point out that essentially in one of the talking points from National Association of Counties, it points out that a county could be liable for maintaining the integrity of their ditches, even if the federal permits are not approved by the federal agencies in a timely manner. As an example, in 2002, 4th District Court of Appeals held the County of Monterey, California, liable for not maintaining a levee that failed due to overgrowth of vegetation, even though the county argued that the core permit process did not allow for timely approvals. So the two things that NACO is asking for, National Association of Counties, and I'm assuming that probably National League of Cities will have a similar perspective, is to extend the time for comments to 180 days from 90. And then the second thing is we do need to provide some comments, I think, to on this issue, and we need to let our Colorado delegation know of our perspective on this. So, however, we need to, I'm certainly not the expert on this. Rob, you have the talking paper, and I think NACO's coming out with some more specific points as we look at this. But I think 2 points is we need to let our delegation know we want the extension, which would help us in formulating our position. And then number 2, we need to make sure we get the comments in a timely manner, because this could have a major impact on costs to counties, cities, and water agencies, all different levels of government. So I don't know if we need some kind of a motion to that, or if we can just sort of direct staff with a head nod.
I think we can direct staff to formulate a paper and circulate that to the board. Any opposition? Clerk and Recorder Williams.
Only, I don't know if I'd call it opposition, but just a urge that it actually go a little bit further. I think the per se classification of everything that is tributary is an incredible overreach by the federal government, and simply is not supported by the federal system of government that we're supposed to have. And to take away state control over periodic tributaries. Look, the Mississippi River is a navigable waterway. I understand that. I'm okay with the concept that there needs to be some control. And you shouldn't have separate gates when you enter each state along the way. But a concept that says, if I have a rain barrel at my house that catches water that would flow into Fountain Creek, or Monument Creek that would flow into Fountain Creek, that would flow into the Arkansas, that would flow into the Mississippi, and therefore they can control the rain barrel at my house, is just ridiculous. And
it's nothing that a NEPA study wouldn't handle.
It's great that what we know from federal regulation is it increases cost and reduces responsiveness and makes it harder for people to talk to the elected officials or any bureaucrat that's actually in charge of the process. And so I think we ought to go much further than just say, can we have some more time?
I would like to ask our military partners, since you probably won't be writing a letter to weigh in on this, if we knew how this might affect your installations, we would be happy to include that without attributing that information to any particular person. Councilman Pico.
Yeah, I just got the document that you sent. Haven't had time to look at it with all the fun and excitement over the last couple of days, but I did note the size of it. But it looks to me, as I listen to the description of this and how it's being put together, that it's a huge land grab that's coming in there and is going to affect all of us here. And our role here is taking a look at the utilities. We've got tremendous amount of watershed here, which is going to get tied into it. The idea that anything that is navigable or associated with it, even if you're using hip waders to go through the puddle, has an awful lot of implications, and pretty much. So I absolutely agree. We need to do something a bit stronger than than just study it or ask for comments in here. I think right now, obviously, we need to have the staff take a look at it and start coming back with some recommendations how we put together and take a strong position. But I think we definitely need to go down that road. We have to stand up against this one.
Rod.
Just to address a little bit that from a federal standpoint, at Fort Carson, of course, as a federal agency with the Department of Defense, we already have to deal with point source discharge permits as well as 404 permits for wetlands, and the NEPA process is fully integrated because we are a federal agency. And it is time consuming, as well as some of the other laws that go up for renewal from time to time, whether it's the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, or whatever. A lot of comments I see go in for some of these things, which would be appropriate in this case, is to at least ask also for a demonstration for the federal governing agencies like the EPA and in this case probably the Corps of Engineers to be able to demonstrate that they could handle the bureaucracy of this increase, because this is a huge increase, as was just mentioned, to include all these tributaries and then to look at the cumulative effect, because if you have a big enough watershed, individual items may not in and of themselves, but if you have to in a cumulative basis consider it, then that's a lot of science and study that has to go into just the application to the process. So I see this as an extremely big issue that we, even in the federal government, would have to deal with because the definition is changing. Even though we're aware of the process and have been doing it for years, it still has impact for us.
Jason, I'm assuming that some of this is going to fall on your plate. Are you taking notes?
Yes.
Okay.
We'll compare our notes with Mark and utilities and others.
Right, and I was just going to add that certainly through the Water Congress and the Western Urban Water Coalition and others, we'd be glad to share our comments and observations and concerns.
Okay. So we're agreed that PPACG staff will put together comments and perhaps we do too. We do the short and quick, give me more time that we send in, and then we get to work on more substantial comments. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I would also encourage all of our independent boards to also send letters and let our delegation know, because I think there's safety in numbers too, and it makes a difference if all of our respective organizations did our own letters. So once we get something put together from PPACG, maybe we can model similar letters to our delegation members over this.
Any other comments? Thank you, Mark.
Well,
yes.
do you want me to go to the next item?
Oh, you have more?
I have more.
Okay.
I'll just
Noel, did you have a comment on this item?
No, I didn't.
Okay. Mark, continue on.
Yeah, the second item I wanted to mention is it's called the Water Transfer Rule, and it's extremely significant. What this is a rule that EPA adopted in the waning days of the Bush administration at the urging primarily of Western water interests. And it says that if you engage in a trans-basin or intra-basin diversion of water through a ditch, a canal, a pipeline, a tunnel, I mean, like we do all over Colorado, we have hundreds of these. You don't need a point source discharge permit like a industrial discharge or a wastewater facility would, because you're just moving the water. You're not adding chemical constituents to the water. And the reason we asked for that rule is there were court decisions going the other way, and the primary one being for New York City's water supply through the Catskill Mountains. They were sued for not having a discharge permit where the tunnel exited on the New York City side, and they lost the case. And so the rules adopted but immediately wound up in litigation. The theory went all the way to the United States Supreme Court in a case called Miccosukee involving pumping water over a dike, really, that took it from the ocean side of the dike to the Everglades side. There was just huge pumps making sure the groundwater on the ocean side wouldn't rise to the point where people were literally flooded out. And they were sued, the operators of the pumps, for not having a discharge permit for moving the water over the dike. And at the lower court level, they lost, and eventually it went all the way to the United States Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court didn't answer the question of whether you need permit just to move water, because they said, well, we don't know if that water would have been part of the Everglades without the dike, and it's just one unitary water body. And if it is, you don't need a permit, because it's like going out in the lake and dipping a pail in and pouring the water out of the pail. I mean, yeah, you discharge to the lake, but it's the same water that was in the lake to start with. So we didn't get an answer out of the Supreme Court, and now the rule itself has been challenged. And a couple of weeks ago, the Southern District of New York Federal District Court basically said that EPA did not have a sound basis for the rule. But rather than simply throwing it out in its entirety, it remanded it back to EPA to see if it could bolster its justification for the rule. So the western states were a party to that, intervener party, and so we too were on the losing end. And you can imagine what would happen if every one of our trans-basin diversions or tunnels or pipelines that transfer water needed to have a 402 discharge permit. And so right now EPA has until May 30th to appeal that decision. They're being very close-lipped about it. We asked the assistant administrator last week when we saw her if they're going to appeal, and she said she was not at liberty to say. The state of Colorado and a few other western states have said they are appealing regardless of what EPA decides to do, but obviously it won't look too good if EPA doesn't appeal. And eventually that case will probably wind up in the United States Supreme Court, because the Second Circuit, New York, probably will say you need a permit. The 11th Circuit in Florida has already said you don't. And that's a basis for the Supreme Court to decide. But it's an issue that we're watching extremely closely, and that the Western Governors Association issued a letter yesterday to EPA headquarters basically saying that they definitely should appeal this decision. It's just too important to us. Any questions on that?
Anything that we should do?
Probably not at this time, because a lot of major actors like states have already put their marker out there saying you have to take this all the way. And the state of Colorado has been very good in this regard.
Okay. Questions for Mark? Anything else?
Let me just mention a couple of other things in the interest of time. I think everybody knows that the state of Colorado for the first time is developing a state water plan through the Basin Roundtables, and the Arkansas has one, and through the IBCC, it's called the Interstate Basin Compact Commission. That plan has to be a final draft by the end of this year, has to be on the governor's desk, and then it'll be actually finalized by the end of next year. A part of that plan, one chapter, is the integration of water quality and water quantity. So I'm just going to put the offer out there at one of your future meetings. If you want a little briefing on the state water plan and the water quality section of that plan, I'd be glad to provide that, because there are obviously a lot of overlaps between quality and quantity. And then the last thing I'll mention is, being on the commission, we get a heads up of what's coming down the road. And as Rich is probably painfully aware, both temperature and nutrients were very huge rulemakings in the last couple of years, and now they're being implemented, and there's a cost associated with those. The ones that are in the future that are already under discussion are new criteria for sediment, selenium, arsenic, and ammonia. Probably the ones of greatest concern are sediment, selenium, and ammonia. Selenium's important for us in the Arkansas because it's a natural constituent. It's almost ubiquitous because of our shale soils, and we do exceed the standard as a consequence. Sediment's important because of the nature of the stream systems we have here on the plain side of the mountains. They transport a lot of sediment, and we're talking clean sediment criteria, not polluted. And then ammonia is gotten everyone's attention because the new proposal that's coming out of EPA is based on tests they've done on freshwater mussels found in certain parts of the United States, and it dramatically lowers the ammonia levels that our wastewater plants will be able to discharge. Significant cost upgrades would have to be done. And so the state of Colorado is going to try to join with a couple of other western states to actually pay for a study to, number one, show whether or not these mussels even exist in our area, and if they don't, saying that criteria is not appropriate. But even if they do, have they adapted to our climatic and hydrologic conditions? because, like I said, there's a lot of investment at stake here. So that's sort of looking forward what we have on our plate. And that's it.
Thank you. Other comments? Appreciate it. Glad you're there. Item 5.5, Integrated Water Resource Plan Presentation, Colorado Springs. Gwen, do you have that one? You're not Gwen.
Volunteered.
So as Commissioner Heisey said, I am definitely not Gwen Happ, but Commissioner Heisey and Gwen arranged for this opportunity this morning. Appreciate the opportunity to address you on this topic. Given the topics you've covered so far this morning, I want to zoom out a little bit with respect to time, so not so much on the immediate and more on the long-range planning perspective, and also a little bit broader in terms of a statewide perspective, although you will see a number of items identified in this presentation that link right up with Mark's presentation, as well as some of the topics that Rich Muzzy briefed you on. So this is particularly germane to some of the question we had, or some of the topics discussed here this morning about tributaries and what are waters of the U.S. Second largest municipal or urban water provider in the state, and yet we're not located near a major water source. So we do not have the South Platte running through us like Denver does, nor do we have the Platte and the Poudre system running through our community as they do in the Fort Collins-Greeley area. That does present a number of challenges, which I'll highlight in subsequent slides. Here's where I'm going to go today. A little bit about our water planning in our system today. Why are we doing this planning process now? Purpose and goals of our process. Some of the key factors affecting water resources in Colorado Springs. The opportunities this planning process presents for us as a utility. A little bit on the technical analysis, although this is just an overview. There is at least another hour presentation that could be done just on the methodologies and the technical processes we're using in this planning effort. And then a little bit more on other aspects of the public and stakeholder involvement we're doing in addition to presentations like this. We've come a long way. I think that upper left-hand corner is one of the more humorous ones, although it clearly shows the Wild West of a century ago. Victor decided they wanted water and held up our caretaker at gunpoint. Fortunately, we don't do that anymore. It usually tends to involve cell phones and attorneys. Perhaps more effective in law-abiding, but not as immediate. Just some very brief graphs on water use, one specific to Colorado Springs on the left, on the right, a broader view by sector for the United States. It's my understanding that this presentation either already has been distributed to you or you can get it, so I'm not going to dwell on actual values on all of those. Although you will realize or recognize there on that graph, about 44% of our water use in Colorado Springs is due to landscaping. That's the biggest chunk of the chart. Second to that, or second and third place, are toilets and showers. And so you recognize kind of our hierarchy in terms of how we choose to use our water here. A little bit on our system. It's pretty complex, developed over decades, and its geographic layout and its complexity really derives from the reality that we're on Fountain Creek and not on the Arkansas and not on the South Platte or even the Mississippi. About 70% comes from over the Continental Divide, so that is why the issue that Mark raised regarding trans-basin, trans-mountain diversions is so important. Roughly 50% we call first-time use. In other words, that's the first time it comes through the tunnel. By virtue of our reuse programs, both reuse by exchange and wastewater reclamation, we get about another 20% of our demand met by those reuse systems. Delivered by 3 pipelines, soon to be 4. This is not primarily a presentation on Southern Delivery System. I think many of you in the room have been present for presentations on that, and that project is well underway. About 200 miles of raw water pipeline. Water travels roughly 100 miles to the city from our farthest point. Although if you went to the very top of the furthest watershed, I think it's actually a bit further than that. And about 25 reservoirs are used to store that water. One of the key features of water in the West is the water never occurs in the place or the time or the amount that people like to use it, or for that matter, farmers. Why are we doing this now? Well, a southern delivery system nearing completion in some ways can be seen as the most significant final component of the previous water resource plan that the Colorado Springs City Council approved in 1996. So on the right, you see the four main elements of the 96 plan: conservation, non-potable water development, existing system improvements, and major water delivery system. In 96, we had not finalized the southern alternative. We were still very much active in evaluating a western alternative. Ultimately, for numerous reasons, southern was better. The chief among the existing system improvements include projects like the Otero expansion system, which expanded one of those three existing pipelines by roughly 12 to 13%. Planning is continuous. It's really one of the main functions of my group within utilities. However, periodically we, in some ways, put a stake in the ground and develop a specific plan resulting in a specific document that really provides a firm roadmap for future activity. And as you've certainly been briefed on some aspects of it, increasing uncertainty in water supplies in the West, we certainly recognize that. And not all of those uncertainties are necessarily physical or natural, but institutional. A little comparison graph on our two plans. 1996 Water Resource Plan, need for new projects. Primarily we were looking at timing and amounts and sizing of future projects, including projects like the Southern Delivery System. And we used a relatively simple, I guess depending on your perspective, simple from a water resource engineering or modeling perspective, much more complex in terms of what we're doing today. A lot of that enabled by advances in hardware and software that, quite frankly, just weren't even available in the late 90s. And any of us who are carrying around small digital devices know how much that's changed in the last 10 years or so. Our purpose, as I noted, a roadmap for the future, is a long-range plan. About 1/3 of my staff typically works in the 5-year to 50-year time horizon. We typically say from the snowflake to the reservoir. And that's really the focus of that. And the thing that's another aspect that's changed just from a technical standpoint since 96 is in terms of conceptually, we started our thinking once the snow was on the ground. The water resources management industry profession in general, as well as our staff, has really pushed now to become much better educated about climatology and meteorology and understanding how climate variability affects our planning processes. Our goals: sustainable long-term water supply, resilient and reliable water supply. One of the key aspects of our current simulation modeling is trying to quantify resiliency, quantify reliability, redundancy, and provide some metrics to see. In some ways, it's kind of like stress testing a vehicle. If you've ever either witnessed or seen a video of a vehicle on a dynamo, in a lot of ways, our computer model operates a little bit like that with respect to our water system. Is we plug the appropriate variables in and run it through some scenarios and try to take it up the red line and see if we can break it. And by doing that with the model rather than the real system, of course, we can figure out where those improvements need to be, what types of additional efforts we need to take on. The bottom one there really ties to where I'll end up with this presentation, is develop a plan that's acceptable and explainable to our customers. And our presentation here today is part of that public process to understand what people's questions are, how we can explain a rather complex issue. It's certainly multi-factored and pulls in a combination of both the natural systems as long as the man-built systems. This slide here is, again, trying to zoom out a bit from global to the global area, or global perspective, through the national trends, state trends, and ultimately how that gets implemented, how that affects the Colorado Springs area. Paradigm is one of those words that I kind of love to hate, but we certainly do recognize that there's a shift in the way we think about water resources management and competing social values with respect to consumptive uses like municipalities and agricultural interests, and how that intersects the environmental and recreational, or sometimes called non-consumptive values within the state and within the nation. We certainly have increasing pressures on costs to obtain, treat, and deliver that water. Nothing ever seems to get cheaper. And a long range, or a large range of uncertainty in population and demand forecasts. We have to press our economists to try to forecast population or economic activity much longer than about 10 years. And yet 10 years from a water planning perspective and infrastructure development perspective is like half a day. Our projects take a long time to plan and permit and get developed, constructed. There's two slides here that are just some cartoons, and very deliberately we don't have any numbers on these slides. When we look at the phase one of the Southern Delivery System, we recognize that it's improving our reliability, and on the left side, the beginning of the time horizon, the blue line provides us a high level of redundancy to our existing 3 pipeline systems. So if we have to take one of those systems down, 50 million gallons per day of additional conveyance capacity is going to provide nearly 100% redundancy to any one of those pipes or in excess of it. However, as demands grow in the community, that redundancy is going to decrease as a percentage. And that's all that's meant by that blue curve. Again, no numbers on here. It's not a percentage. It's not a million gallons per day or acre feet per year. At the same time, because of the reuse by exchange nature of our water resource system, and because additional phases of Southern Delivery System will include storage, we don't get the immediate yield of the system, the immediate yield benefit of Southern Delivery until subsequent years. Because of the reuse by exchange and reuse by reclamation, wastewater reclamation aspect of Colorado Springs system, we have this weird phenomena that the more we use, the more we have. Because the more we use, the more we put back in the stream system, the more this goes back into the stream system through our wastewater is, again, available for exchange and then recirculation back through the system. So, again, you see that yield increase over time. A similar type of curve, and this goes to the regionalization issue, and one of the key questions we want to answer with the IWRP process is Colorado Springs in a, I've characterized it as a little r or a big R scenario. Are we proactively developing regionalization opportunities, or are we more passive, kind of in the middle? And there's some interesting policy discussions there. There's both risks and opportunities for Colorado Springs utilities in the midst of all of our watershed neighbors to take on regionalization. And one of those is demonstrated with this cartoon. SDS deliveries for utilities in the bottom line, they'll increase over time as our demands grow and as we need to shift some of our peak water demand to the new SDS treatment plant as a percentage. Initially, we'll have some excess capacity in that. First couple of years, on an average annual basis, we may only pump about 5 to 10 million gallons per day out of a 50 million gallon per day system. And so initially there will be some excess capacity. As our demand grows, that excess capacity will start to get used up as Colorado Springs moves into a greater and greater fraction towards 50 MGD and ultimately leads to the timing of subsequent phases with the ultimate capacity to Colorado Springs of about 78 MGD. For SDS. So again, there's a trade-off there for Colorado Springs Utilities customers in relation to regional opportunities. Here are some of the key factors affecting our water resources. I won't read every word on this slide. None of these should be surprises to those of us that have paid any attention to this. Demand variability, environmental challenges, including the sort that Mark was describing earlier. Climate variability very well could be a game changer. 2011 was one of the wettest years of record in terms of inflows to Lake Powell into Colorado. 12 and 13 were among the lowest on record. And this year we tend to be at least, what we're forecasting anyway, 2014 appears to be at least in the upper half, maybe even in the upper quarter or upper 10th percentile of inflows to Powell. So in a 4-year period, we're going through some very dramatic changes. We're not bumping around anywhere close to average. We're moving between extremes, and that seems to be a developing trend, at least so far within the last 10 years or so. Some of our key opportunities. The first one's kind of a double-edged sword. On the one hand, some of these risks are developing slowly, but at the same time, we certainly can't lull ourselves into any form of apathy or procrastination in terms of the efforts we take on. We do recognize a regional approach has the potential to benefit customers and reduce risk to utilities. And a part of that will be the potential to expand and enhance our non-potable system. But that one, too, has its limits. There are some folks running around the state who believe that conservation and reuse of existing supplies are the answer to all of the gaps or all of the issues before us. They're certainly a part of the puzzle. They're a part of the pie chart, so to speak, but they're certainly not the solution to everything. Watershed emphasis with respect to the risks of wildfires and the subsequent floods, water quality protection. I would offer a qualifier at this point. Water quality is not water quality protection, water quality permitting, water quality mitigation issues are not the core of the IWRP. We have other folks at utilities that focus primarily on that, but we recognize that water quality, water quantity nexus and have to consider impacts to water quality with any of the water supply development opportunities we would pursue. And there's always an opportunity to increase the education, increase the level of understanding within our community, particularly as we recognize both our children growing into adulthood who may or may not have been attentive to this during their school years, but also the number of people that move to the community from other geographies, especially east of the Mississippi. I'm not going to dwell a lot on this scientific modeling piece, other than to say that we're pretty much done with modeling, developing the baseline conditions, doing some simulations on 2016 conditions. And the reason we're modeling 2016 conditions is that will be the commercial operation date for Southern Delivery. So that's kind of our starting point. In some ways, internally we talk about the 96 Water Resource Plan being the left side of the book, SDS being the spine, and this IWRP being the right side of the book. In the second quarter and into the third quarter, we'll be moving into that center box, quantifying the impacts of risks, getting more and more quantitative about the risks due to infrastructure failure, demand increases, drought, and potentially, depending on a lot more public process and conversations, what sorts of regionalization alternatives or scenarios would we consider? Ultimately, towards the end of this year and the beginning of 2015, we'll start to evaluate the benefits of the solutions and start to document and to plan some future directions. Here's a little more detail on what we want to find out. How are we doing now? Again, I kind of like my automotive dynamo example. We're putting our water system on the dynamo, running it real hard to see how well it's doing right now, and throwing at it some risks that we haven't really been able to quantify previously or simulate. Subsequent to that, we'll look what should we be prepared for, getting the best catalog we can think of to identify those risks and opportunities, and what does that mean for the system as it exists today. What does it mean for the system with existing planned infrastructure improvements? And then what sorts of infrastructure and non-structural projects and programs do we need to develop in the future to address those risks and take advantage of those opportunities? And then finally, and this is one of the key ones, in the past we looked primarily at some per capita demand applied to population forecasts to inform water resource decision making. We're trying to get past that idea that it's a simple two-term equation and look at what types of signposts trigger future actions. Is it just a point in time? Is it a particular MGD? Is it a particular storage level? Are there particular risk factors that maybe we saw on the horizon but really come to fruition that would trigger specific events, whether that's developing a new reservoir, expanding capacity in existing systems, acquiring new sources of supply, et cetera. This somewhat replicates the graphic for the simulation graph previously. Major phases of work. We're pretty much done with phase one, planning the factors and the risks, moving deeper into the more technical analyses, options identification and evaluation. You'll see the big block across the bottom there, public involvement program, certainly today is part of that overall program that will take place through the middle of 2015. So your input, what are we missing? So again, this is very much a high-level flyover. There's a lot more detail available pretty much on any one of these slides that I gave you this morning. If you see key things that we're missing in this evaluation, you can get a hold of me, you can get a hold of Gwen. It is on the CSU website, and I've got some more detail for you on that a little bit later. What are the most important issues you'd like us to consider as we plan for the next 50 years? Certainly some of the topics that have been part of the broader discussion in this forum this morning are at the center of the table with that. What would you be willing to do to protect the reliability of our future water supply? Not all of that's going to be money, but that's certainly going to be a part of it. We recognize this is a costly endeavor just to protect what we have, as well as develop our future options. And then what are your concerns, and who else should we be talking to about this plan? We've tried to brainstorm all the stakeholders in the basin and the region, as well as the larger Arkansas Basin. Mark mentioned the Colorado Water Plan. We have staff that are involved in that at the state level. So we've got a fairly broad scope right now, but that's not to say that we haven't missed somebody. So if you can think of any particular group of stakeholders or individuals you really think we ought to talk to scope this planning process as we continue forward, we certainly want to hear about it. Regional stakeholder concerns. These are some of the things that we've heard so far. We don't have any predetermined outcome on this. We certainly have a lot of ideas, and we've tried to brainstorm, identify, quantify as many of the risks as we can see on the horizon, but we certainly have no predetermined outcome in any of these alternatives or scenarios we're considering. This doesn't have any effect on SDS Phase 1. It's well under construction. We understand how it's going to operate in the first 5 to 10 years. We don't, at this point, have any firm timelines on Phase 2 elements, whether those are the terminal storage reservoirs, the effluent storage reservoirs, or additional pumping and treatment capacity. These are a few of the things that we're doing as part of that overall public involvement program. Bullet 3, I guess, is primarily, or Bullet 5 there is primarily where this forum fits. We are contemplating some open houses later on this year. We have one customer survey that's been completed that was really focused on eliciting community values around water resources. And we anticipate doing an additional survey towards the end of the planning process, somewhat as an evaluation of our own process to see how values and concerns may have changed over time. We have the first of several focus groups scheduled for next week, different folks from around the community. We do have an advisory group deliberately designed to include people from across the community, nonprofits, conservation groups. There are Vince Guthrie from Fort Carson is on that group, the City of Colorado Springs, folks from the so-called green industry, which is not necessarily the environmental and conservation industry, but those folks that are involved in landscape and lawn maintenance in the community. So there's a pretty good cross-section there. They meet monthly, and we have another meeting, is it this week, Gwen, or next week? Tomorrow. And the purpose of that group is really a focused, very deliberate conversation with the same group of people for the duration of the process, where most of these others are more episodic or kind of a snapshot in time. You can follow the progress on this planning process at csu.org. We will have an extensive communication campaign to get the dates and locations for those public open houses in late 2014. Gwen's email is there. My email address is essentially the same, first initial, last name, if you want to send it to both of us. But certainly if you send it to Gwen, she'll get it to me. And with that, I'm open to any questions you might have.
Questions for Brett? Silence.
Does there come a point when there isn't any more water? I mean, do you know a number of people that Colorado Springs can support? There's no end to the population growth. It just keeps on growing, and you keep looking for more water.
Well, that's a good question. We get that question a lot. I sometimes get that question in a different flavor, where it says, well, when are we just going to put up the fence? When are we going to close the door and say no more? I think the state is asking that question as well as Colorado Springs. One of the problems we have with that as a state, and certainly within Colorado Springs, I don't know what the state demographers' numbers are, but I know in Colorado Springs, depending on our demand forecast, our population forecast, our median growth projection says roughly half of our population growth is, I'll use the $50 word, endogenous. It's our kids and grandkids. So in some ways you can ask when that will occur. It might be sooner, it might be later, whether we're on a high growth track or a low growth track. But eventually that question leads around to when do we need to ask our kids and grandkids to leave? because it's not really about in-migration. And so I don't have a good answer for you on that. I think people in the early 20th century were asking the same question. In some ways, if we, in the West, if we limited our growth, our population growth and our water demand specifically to our geography, Colorado Springs couldn't be any bigger than it was in about 1950. And that's when we first went beyond the Fountain Creek watershed to Trans Mountain systems to import water. Similar, I don't know the exact numbers, but similar analogies can be developed for pretty much any of the Front Range communities with respect to water supply. So I'm afraid I don't have a number for you. We with respect to our planning process, putting aside the regionalization question for a moment, our planning process focuses on Colorado Springs defined service territory. And so our demand forecasts and population forecasts are within that defined service territory, as it may be modified by annexations in the future. But working with our counterparts in city planning, we have a pretty good idea of some of the likely and perhaps unlikely areas that would be annexed into the community. So with a buffer, with an uncertainty at the end, we're looking at roughly 200 square miles. And we have some decent estimates on what demand growth looks like with infill development of various types, whether it's commercial, industrial, residential, within those boundaries. So that's the best I can answer at this point, but there's certainly no population number or demand value, acre feet per year, or million gallons per day that we have developed at this point.
And a follow-up question. In most supply and demand issues, the cost factor brings it to get, pulls it all together. So does Colorado Springs have a escalating, you said 40% was to landscaping. So is there an escalating cost? Does the cost spike up when you get past the household use and go into landscaping?
There is. We have a three-tiered rate structure, and I'm less familiar with our commercial and industrial rate structure, but residential certainly has the biggest percentage with respect to the indoor-outdoor fraction. We're on an average annual basis, we're somewhere between 50-50 and 60-40. That slide there has 44% on it. It's been closer to 50-50 in the past. I think there's a general trend because of the price signal of a tiered rate structure that we're moving closer to a 60-40 indoor-outdoor ratio as a long-term average.
And that cuts your consumptive use down if it's going back into the system.
As a percentage, yes, that's right, because indoor use, better than 90, usually better than 95% of indoor use returns to the stream. Not all of that water that returns to the stream is reusable. Some of those are native supplies that must go downstream on the Arkansas, but to the extent some of that's Trans Mountain supplies or other reusable supplies like converted agricultural water, then that's reusable by exchange or by wastewater reclamation.
Thank you. Other questions, comments? Rob?
We do have the population number. For the two counties in our long-range plan through 2040, Craig will correct me if I'm wrong, but 1 million is the estimated population that, using U.S. Census, state demographer, all the utilities, including spring utilities. It's not a water supply number, but it's a population number. And so collectively, all the water suppliers we're anticipating will need to fulfill for 1 million people by 2040 in Teller and El Paso County.
And I would just add to that, one of the things that utilities for all four of its services has done, I'm going to say for at least 10 years, is population forecasts are a component where they're embedded within an econometric model that we use to forecast our demands. But our water demands are not the simple equation of per capita demand times population. There's too many other factors with respect to weather, residential versus commercial mix, indoor versus outdoor ratio, a whole range of things that affect the ultimate water demand. So I saw the equation once. It makes my head hurt, but it's not the simple one for sure.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity.
Moving on to our action items. Item 6A, TIP Amendment number 16. Craig, looks like you've got this one.
Yes. Good morning. TIP Amendment 16 is adding $2 million to the Fillmore interchange. CDOT's initial $11 million price estimate was about $2 million under. It needs about $13 million. There are two options to this TIP amendment. However, both options agree that about $700,000 should come from CDOT's RAMP program to fill that $2 million miss. $300,000 should come from PPACG's STP Metro pool of uncommitted funds. Option A is a proposal from the City of Colorado Springs to use PPRTA maintenance funds to put onto CDOT's project, but that's contingent upon the PPRTA later today acting in that direction. The PPRTA CAC voted 10-1 not to use PPRTA maintenance funds on a maintenance project. Option B is CAC and staff's recommendation to use $1 million of the STP Metro pool and put that on the project. What that does is it keeps the project moving forward.
Before you move on, you said staff and CAC. You're talking the RTA CAC because we heard earlier today that PPACG CAC approved option A, didn't they?
No, they approved option B with staff.
Okay. All right. Sorry, Bob, I misunderstood there.
So yeah, the PPACG CAC and staff, and I guess per se agreement would be PPRTA CAC to use the $1 million from STP Metro. What that does is keeps us flexible. The project still goes forward without missing a beat, but at a later date, if the PPRTA puts the maintenance funds or some other source of funds comes in, we can do an administrative amendment, pull those funds off, and put them back in the pool for use on another project. So it just maintains flexibility, keeps everything moving forward. And then later, if something happens, then we can take the Metro off. With our MOA with CDOT on TIP amendments, we can't add federal funds without going through a whole amendment, but we can take them off and replace them with local administratively.
Okay.
Are there any questions?
Let's go to Councilmember Knight first. I'm looking. I got the feeling he was not quite ready. So.
As stated, option A is the recommendation of our planning department from the city, our public works department from the city, and we wholly support that. Some of those other things, I mean, there's a little concern of color of money in here, but there is for people that have been in the military. But Kathleen has assured she has a way to do the zero balance transfers to bring that all back to legal and kosher. The biggest thing on this is option A allows us to support our military, specifically Peterson Air Force Base. Right now we have that section of Powers and Airport where everybody's trying to get through the West Gate. Kathleen will tell you it is graded F with a down arrow, and I added that in. It's very critically important. You realize we had that on our on ramp, and it's about the only thing that got funded. When it didn't get funded, Colonel Shaw, came back to City Council. How can we fix this? How can we work this? Kathleen's been working very hard with him, and he's personally here today to talk about the importance. So I'll turn it over to him.
Sure. First, apologize. I'm getting over a cold, as is the local weather from what I saw earlier this week. I think a lot of you have heard me say in different venues already articulate the perspective from where I am at Peterson on the need for the attention on the Powers widening and ultimately an interchange. I mean, I think that's something that had been looked at a number of years ago and is still hopefully something that we get to someday. Mostly it's fundamentally a need of safety and base access. I think we are at a level F in terms of level of service. That's a great concern to me and the airmen that work on the base and the 13,000 total employees that come onto Peterson every day, not to mention the 1,000-plus residents that live on Peterson every day. Just a reminder that the West Gate, which Powers serves, is the primary access point to Peterson Air Force Base. It's the only 24-hour gate and is again our main gate. I think another element that I would mention here is that I'm not a decision maker when it comes to investment in Peterson, but I definitely play a role in trying to facilitate growth. And we continually see interest in Peterson. In the tenure that I've been here in the last year, multiple groups with some that have already committed to Peterson Special Operations Command Northcom, for example, is coming to Peterson. So I don't anticipate that the usage of Peterson will decline over time and possibly accelerate. And so the condition or problem that we have right now may actually be aggravated over time if we don't address it. So that's just my perspective from Peterson.
You know, since this is about Fillmore, Kathleen, could you kind of explain how that ties into the...
Certainly. It is rather confusing, but actually I'll hopefully clear it up. Last fall, I put on my PPRTA budget proposal $1 million because I had talked to CDOT and knew that there was going to be a shortage of funds for the ramp proposal for Fillmore, that we would need to find some way of backfilling that shortage. That budget proposal was approved by PPRTA board in December of 2013. For those of you that care about such things, it's Appendix D of the budget, page 1, the bottom line on that budget. And that is in a maintenance fund. However, when I discussed this with CAC last week, CAC had concerns about setting a precedent of using maintenance money on a state highway, even though the maintenance fund specifically addresses using maintenance funds for safety issues on intersections. But seeing that, I have a great deal of funding in a capital project to rebuild signals, which is basically a maintenance project that I was using capital funds for because I didn't have enough maintenance funds to do all the signals that needed to be done. So what CAC is recommending to the PPACG board for approval this afternoon is to swap the $1 million of signal rehab from a capital fund to the maintenance fund and put the Fillmore grant match into the capital fund of traffic projects under intersection safety project. So it becomes a capital fund of PPRTA to do that. And as I say, the budget itself has already been approved by PPRTA. So why do I want to use the city's PPRTA money to fund Fillmore? It's very simple. The city is very concerned about a number of regional projects in our community, and one of the ones we're most concerned about is the Powers widening. We had hoped to get ramp funding for Powers widening, and that did not happen. When that didn't happen, the city staff and CDOT staff sat down and began to look at that proposed project, which was a $10 million project, and we began to strip it of anything unnecessary and just take it down to what purely do we have to do in order to get the capacity and safety issues improved on Powers from Platte to Fountain. And we brought it down to a $5.5 million project. CDOT, Tom Rona has offered $1 million of CDOT money for that project, but that left us $4.5 million short. And so since that time, we've been looking for funding that could be used for that. By using the PPRTA money on Fillmore, that basically saves $1 million of Metro funds. You heard Tom talk about the TAC having special meetings this last month and looking at a TIP amendment number 18 that'll be coming up hopefully sometime in the near future. That is for the purpose of trying to fund Powers widening. And we have a couple different ways that we're looking at trying to do that. But it would include Metro's money that we have been able to save from this Fillmore project if we put PPRTA. So even though Fillmore and Powers sit at different sides of the city, there actually is a connection between the two of them. We're simply trying to use the most efficient way of putting our money together so that we can get the most out of the money. By using PPRTA funding that has been approved at Fillmore, I can save those Metro dollars, and hopefully we will be bringing another amendment to you soon to have you approve funding for Powers as well. Any questions?
Yes, but let's go to Councilmember Pico first.
Yeah, I don't have a question, just emphasizing the support for the option A. It was a comment that was made earlier that caused me to dive into the stuff here was split up between the TAC and the CAC, and our TAC did recommend option A, as I read through this.
Yes.
Our CAC said otherwise, but I think what we really need to do is push for that option to try to get that Peterson Road, Peterson interchange taken care of, widening of Powers, because I think that is a very critical driver, and it's something we need to keep pushing on that. Recognizing that that's a policy decision for the PPRTA to undertake here this afternoon, but contingent upon that, I would very strongly recommend that option A, and we try to reallocate the other money as much as possible to that Powers widening. I think it's very important. Go ahead.
Thank you. Councilmember Knight, further comments?
Yeah, I want to go back on to reiterate or re-stress something Colonel Shaw said about potential growth. We've been briefed by the MAC and by the state board headed up by General Anderson on what all they're doing to prepare for the BRAC. And it's really a two-pronged attack for Fort Carson. It's protect Fort Carson and the infrastructure. For Peterson, there's opportunity to grow and bring that out there. So, that is on the radar scope of a lot of people around the state to be able to use the BRAC to actually bring more Air Force units here to Peterson, and so that just stresses the criticality of that. So with that, I'd like to make the motion to that we adopt option A.
Do we have a second? Thank you. Kathleen, well, actually, this is probably not a question for Kathleen, but feel free to remain here should you want to comment on it. In the interest of making sure everything is brought out to light, you're wanting to preserve Metro funds.
Yes.
Metro funds are available for virtually anyone in any municipality or county in this body to request.
That's correct.
I just want to make sure everyone's aware those are not necessarily city.
No. And that's why TAC has been looking at this, and because TAC represents all of the jurisdictions involved in the Pikes Peak region. There are times when TAC doesn't agree. There are times when we have little wrestling matches over money. But the TAC is rather firm in feeling that this is a regional project that we need to complete at this time.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Clark?
Trying to understand all the pots of money that were in Kathleen, don't go away. What I'm kind of wondering about here is this decision, especially option A, is really dependent on PPRTA's decision. And so I'm wondering, in terms of our timeline, is it possible for us to delay this until next month to allow PPRTA to discuss this? I don't know whether it's going to be contentious or not, but I think that maybe I'm not quite sure of the timeline. I mean, I'm an alternate on the PPRTA board. I won't be able to be there this afternoon, but utilizing maintenance funds for capital projects is it's a little dicey sometimes in those discussions, because we want to make sure that, at least I know when we referred these to the ballot, that it was something that we wanted to keep the integrity of PPRTA intact. So certainly that's a decision of the PPRTA board. My concern is, if we approve this today, it's contingent upon another board's decision. And I'm not sure I understand where all the money is being shuffled and exactly what the timeline is for Peterson and the budget, and what other projects might be funded by as Commissioner Heisey pointed out, the Metro funds. I mean, I don't know that I have enough in front of me today. And it's not that I don't, because I thought we should have applied, or the city should have applied for the Tiger Grant for Peterson, and that didn't happen. So now different options are coming forward, and I'm just a little bit concerned about us making a decision before the PPRTA board does.
Let me go to Clerk and Recorder Williams.
Let me just ask a question. Is it possible, Rob, under the federal state rules that we operate under, that we could move approval of option A, and alternatively, if it's not funded by the Pikes Peak RTA, to approve option B. So do a contingent motion, so that way we don't have to come back.
There's no need.
Since it is ultimately PPRTA's board's decision as to whether they do that or not, but approve it with option A, but with a contingency that if PPRTA doesn't fund it, that it is approved with option B.
Yeah, that's the genesis of option B. As Craig said, option B, let CDOT go, and I think they're okay this month or next month. As Craig said, if option B is approved and PPRTA approves $1 million, we can do an email, we call it an administrative tip amendment. We can do that overnight with CDOT and not come back through the CAC, the TAC, and this board, because once you tie onto those federal funds, we've got to go through the process, and you've recommended going through your committees and then back to you. So option B is that, in essence, that if PPRTA puts up the $1 million, then we swap it out tomorrow by email with CDOT, and I think CDOT staff is here. They know we do that, and I'm seeing the head shakes. So that's where B came from. It prevents a month delay or special meetings of everybody. We can do that. But obviously, we recognize PPRTA will make their decision in about 2-3 hours, and then we go forward, or CDOT goes forward with that project.
Yeah, because I think it's to our advantage not to have that delay if the PPRT board adopts something else, because we're now in the middle of construction season. We want to get things going. We want to not have it interrupted by a winter to the extent we can avoid that, or 2 winters, or the faster it can get done, the better. So that's why I would advocate for a approval of a motion that allows us to go forward under either circumstance.
Thank you.
Rob, whenever further. Yeah, a couple quick comments. In the packet, we wanted to make sure the board remembers your current priorities for collecting all the monies. And we know the funding categories are strange and diverse. Let me just pick on the two. You talked about the STP Metro. That's the federal funds directed by this board. So usually when we collect up enough of that money, we'll come back to the board through your committees and say, what's the next priority? And on attachment 2, you can see your latest priorities. The other funding category is Regional Priority Program. You talked about it earlier, that RPP funds. Right now, because we're waiting on reconciliation of that category and the STP Metro category by CDOT, we have some other projects at risk. We heard last Thursday with our meeting with CDOT, city, county, us, and CDOT, that a county project, Highway 24 East, a planning study for $2 million, was never budgeted, even though it's in our tip, it was never budgeted for RPP money. So I asked the question then, I said, okay, if we only have $2 million of Metro money that's most flexible, would we put it to that 24 East study? Again, that's a question for the board. Or we also heard that the US 24 West, $13 million of regional priority program dollars is gone. So does this board want to look at those state highways with either RPP money that we're still reconciling or this STP Metro money that's federal that we're still reconciling? And so we put in your packet your current numbered priorities, and one of those is 24th at 8th Street. To do that interchange or design on that interchange or right-of-way or whatever, that's your stated priority, and that's a number 3. The rest are bulleted lists, and we funded the top or the bottom 2 bullets, one of which is Fillmore, the other one is I-25 widening. So we've collected up that federal money, STP Metro, used RPP money and other flavors to get to your priority. So as you think about your action today, we think option B allows you to be most flexible. CDOT goes ahead with this money, and if other money gets reconciled, PPRTA says, hey, here's $1 million, that's wonderful, we can change it out. But our staff recommendation is think about what's the next priority, and it could very well be widening powers at Peterson. But because we don't know how much money is in that Metro category, it may not be enough to capture and do that $4.4 million or so that's needed of more money for that project. And so I know CDOT is here, and they can speak to the range of Metro money is somewhere between $1 and $4 million. The RPP money range is from 0 to $34 million. But because we don't know that, we're concerned that if you put the money here, you may jeopardize a County 24 East project, or you're going to jeopardize or delay a 24 West project that you've already said, let's go ahead and do. So just for your policy discussion, we want to make sure that you have the flexibility, you're knocking off priorities. Fillmore is a great priority, and it's going to be funded one way or the other, and that's the good news. But again, we don't want to prevent, and I know this board talked about 24 West at length about why we need Cimarron, but the next one on your list is 8th Street. So I'll leave you with that policy dimension as we look forward of how to allocate the scarce resources.
If I could clarify the city's stand on this, that I think has gotten a little confused, it is that this $1 million needs to be left in Metro funds so that that kind of decision can be made through another TIP amendment. I am hesitant to take option B forward this afternoon because I think there would be a real temptation at PPRTA to look at me and say, oh, Kathleen, PPACG has graciously already funded Fillmore completely, so go spend that $1 million on something else. This is really important to the city. We really want to make sure that these regional projects get done. And that is why this is the PPRTA discussion this afternoon is a discussion of what pot of money to take that $1 million out. But I must stress that the PPRTA board has approved that $1 million for Fillmore. It specifically says $1 million for a grant match for a DDI interchange at Fillmore. It was very clear.
Thank you. And I was going to make the same point to you, your initial point that if this $1 million does come from RTA, that just leaves $1 million more in Metro. We're not deciding today where that $1 million will go, even though Kathleen has an idea where she'd like to have it go. But
Kathleen always has an opinion, and she's not hesitant to express it. Thank you.
So, further discussion. We do have a motion on the floor. Yes, Councilmember Miller. Sorry.
I absolutely agree with the. I for years entered in the West Gate. Actually, I entered in what I guess is still called the main gate. I don't know why it's still called the main gate because it's not really the main gate. But
on Peterson?
But then the Peterson rebuilt the West Gate, which reconfigured it to make it the main gate, the main West Gate. So I'm very familiar with waiting for maybe 4 or 5 cycles to get into the West Gate. So I absolutely advocate putting that, moving that up in the TIP as it comes forward as part of our regional issue. My problem with option A is, again, and I think this sort of is in line with what Commissioner Clark said, is bringing forward something to another board, sort of predisposing another board to their decision. And I think it's, I understand Ms. Krager wants to use all the leverage she can and use this board's decision as leverage for the PPRTA board. But I think given the fact that option B still allows the PPRTA board to make that decision and allows Fillmore to get done, because that's what this is about. This is about Fillmore and making sure it's fully funded. It's just shell gaming money around for Fillmore. So if PPRTA board approves, then even with option B, my understanding from staff, and correct me if I'm wrong, that can be done administratively without another board approval. It doesn't set anything back, but it also respects both boards and their sovereign authority. I think sending something to another board with the arm twisting of another board I don't think is appropriate.
Thank you. Anyone in the audience like to comment on this item? Yes. I see we have several people looking around, which tells me the answer is yes. Just who's going to be first? Jim, welcome.
It's nice to be back. Jim Moore for the Military Affairs Council. Simply want to emphasize some of the things that have been said on behalf of the MAC about the Peterson, the Powers expansion, and the need for that priority. However, I'm more interested in clarifying, as I report back to the MAC, my understanding from having participated in these discussions before, as far as funding for the Powers expansion and the Airport Stewart interchange, there is no clarity right now about what funds are available other than the $1 million that the city would like to set aside and the $1 million that PPRTA has in its maintenance contract. Is that correct? Or its maintenance budget? Is that correct?
Rob, do you want to take a short answer on that one?
Short answer. We're really linked to PPRTA. A PPRTA capital project, which is not their maintenance funds. A capital project was right-of-way acquisition for that piece of Powers Boulevard. And I think all but maybe one piece of land has been acquired by CDOT, paid through the PPRTA under their A-list capital project of right-of-way acquisition. So that flavor of money is there. There might be, and CDOT can correct me, I think there might have been some design dollars that CDOT used to get that project a little bit more ready.
That's right.
And so I think, so there's a little bit of federal money, and I think, boy, category could be metro or regional priority. I think it was regional priority money. So there's two or three flavors of money to get it to this point.
Well, we're blending all the colors of the money together. What I heard you say before, though, is we do not know. It sounds to me like if PPRTA approves that capital move and there's $1 million in metro money that's available, there is still a shortfall of something on the order of $4.5 million for the project as outlined currently?
Yeah, I think the other short answer is using just metro money and not knowing what that regional priority pool of money is. So because we don't know two of those, both of those categories of money can be used for this project, but because the numbers range from 0 to 34 in RPP and 1 to 3 million on metro, collectively it doesn't look like there's enough metro money to do that widening project. However, we don't have the full reconciliation with CDOT on either of those categories.
Well, I think, speaking on behalf of the Military Affairs Council, we would support the Powers expansion as the next item, recognizing the Fillmore project needs to be approved, but that however we can get there, that there should be something that puts that widening, supporting the West Gate entrance, getting that one much higher up on the priorities. Thank you.
Thank you. Who'd like to be next?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Mr. Rona.
Yeah. Chairman Heisey, I like Mark Andrews been anxious to speak to this project, as well as I know he planned to address Commissioner Clark's concern or question about the impact on the construction schedule for Fillmore if the action isn't taken today. So, Mark?
Thanks, Tom. Mark Andrews, CDOT. Yeah, it's imperative, I think, we make a decision, option B, to preserve at least that option, to allow the funding to go forward. We're in the final stages of getting Fillmore to construction. This really is the final issue to get that project to construction. Waiting another month will delay the project another month, and, as Wayne Williams indicated, we're in valuable construction season. So we're hoping that we can resolve that. Just a clarification on the Powers widening project as far as the status goes. We have that project almost designed. Rob indicated we have one more piece of right-of-way to buy. We have money for that. And then we have an additional $1 million that we've set aside for construction for that project. So that project is essentially getting close to shelf ready. We anticipate maybe another 6 to probably another 9 months to a year to have that project ready to go to construction. So we do have some time to work out the funding details as we need to get that final piece of right-of-way. So just a summary on that, we're essentially heading down the road to getting that project ready to go.
Can I ask a question of him while he's up there?
Please.
Sir, so 8 to 9 months, is that dependent on local match funding, or is that based on CDOT projected funding?
So the schedule I talked about really is based on the funding coming together, but we also have to buy a piece of right-of-way, and that right-of-way process takes about a year to purchase that. So we have a key piece that we need to get from the airport, and we've been working with them for many months on that. Once we get that final piece in place, the project will be ready to go. But as far as funding the project, that could take anywhere from 2 to 3 months. So the real critical path issue with this project is really getting that right-of-way piece done.
And did you indicate that's airport property?
That's airport property. Yeah, it's a.
I would have to suspect that somehow you could get the right to continue with your construction with details to be followed later, as we do often, if need be, just knowing who owns the airport.
Sure. We've talked to the airport. They have FAA regulations that they must follow as far as disposing of right-of-way. So I know Neil can speak to that a little bit.
Okay.
But we've been trying to acquire that property for about a year now, and again, we have to go through the process, unfortunately. But I appreciate the comment.
That would be the logical. I see.
Yeah.
Clerk and Recorder Williams.
So, Mark, you're saying that the airport can't give a possession and use agreement?
That's possible. I think we need to make an offer first before we go down that road, so we have to appraise it, make that offer, and they can sign a possession and use agreement. So that could speed things up, certainly, and we could work out the final valuation at a later time.
I have great respect for the fact that the airport is owned by a different government other than the one I work for, but I'm hopeful that my elected representatives at said government would be willing to work with you, and I suspect they probably would be, but I'll let them speak for themselves.
They have been.
Councilmember Miller?
So can I ask, and maybe Neil's going to present on this, in the year-long discussions over procurement of this last parcel to complete the right-of-way purchase, is the FAA been the primary hang-up, or is it city negotiations?
We've been finalizing.
Neil, if you could come to the mic, please.
I'm Neil Ralston with the Springs Airport. We've been working with CDOT to finalize the exact property, and then we will go forward to the FAA with a land release process. That has not started yet, as we've still been defining exactly what property it is with the final design of the project. So that's the step we have to do as the airport, is get an FAA land release, as the airport has federal grant funding in it.
Well, it sounds like the first step is this, and then you go to the FAA.
That's been our plan of attack. Yes, that's correct.
But we have the money for that last right of way, or we think, depending on what this comes up with.
No, we anticipate we have the money for it. We've got about $1.3 million in the project right now, and we anticipate we're going to use some of that money for right-of-way and about $1 million for construction. So we haven't appraised the property, but again, we anticipate we'll have the money for that.
I've kind of let this discussion go astray here. This really is about Fillmore. So I'd kind of like to bring it back to that. And I appreciate that they're linked, but I don't want to get into any more real detail on airport.
I'm so lost. I try so hard to come prepared.
Councilmember Thompson.
I try so hard to come prepared to these meetings and really read these over and really ask a lot of questions and try to talk to people I need to. And I really thought I kind of sort of understood this one. I really thought it had to do with Fillmore, and I'm just so...
The reason, let me take a stab at this. The reason we have two options is option A, there's an anticipation that would help get airport and powers funded. So that's why we have the bit of controversy and why we're spending some time on the airport and powers discussion, is because if we approve option A, that would conceivably move some money or make some money available for that project. Option B, not so much, even though we've heard there is still the possibility.
Okay, but if we approve option A, I guess I just don't understand what guarantee there is that the money goes to powers.
There's not a guarantee.
Next month saying, I've just changed my mind and I want it on another project.
Well, or you would have the option of coming in and saying Fountain would like to have that money. So you are correct. There's not a guarantee.
Okay. Right.
But if the money is not set aside, then we know it is not available.
Okay.
Can I just ask a clarifying question on the motion?
Please.
Yes.
If the motion, option A is passed, and PPRTA subsequently rejects it, now we don't have funding for Fillmore. My understanding,
Sounds like-
and that would delay Fillmore, which we said we're ready to get going on. So I will not be supporting option A because I want Fillmore, regardless of what happens this afternoon, I want Fillmore to go on. And if PPRTA decides this afternoon, it doesn't change Fillmore going on, it's going to be administrative swapping of funds, and we can get it done. So I support option B.
Councilmember Pico?
Well, I was kind of looking at this as, if not A, then B, so we could modify perhaps the motion to say, to do that, because, yes, I do not want this thing to fall apart. Option B certainly is a reasonable fallback.
Councilmember Knight?
Yeah, I'm willing to amend the motion to be option A, if not A, then B. But option A is the preferred approach.
And the seconder agrees. And I recognize, Mr. Miller, that you're pretty familiar with Robert's Rules of Order, and while Robert doesn't particularly condone that in the interest of keeping the meeting moving, the chair will allow that. Councilmember Clark?
Thank you, but I'm a commissioner. That's okay.
That's...
At least I am now.
I started by calling Mr. Knight
That's all right.
commissioner, so...
I just wanted to say, I'll support this with the option B, just based on what Mr. Rohn has said, and I agree with Councilwoman Thompson that this has been kind of confusing, because, again, we had the Fillmore info here. We have no guarantees that this sub-discussion that we've had on Powers, although I believe it's a very valuable project, will happen based out of this money. But I'll support this today, but I think it did get sort of convoluted because we were discussing two projects and only one of them is before us. So I'll support it, and then I guess at a future date we'll come back and potentially look at the Powers interchange at a different time. So it's been very confusing. So
I understand.
She's not the only one who's confused.
Neil, did you have anything else to add?
If I can just have a moment, again, Neil Ralston from the Springs Airport, we just wanted to be on record as supporting the preservation of the ability to use Metro funding for the Powers widening project. We have a long history of supporting improvements on the Powers corridor. It's where we live as the airport. And certainly it's good for Peterson Air Force Base, and that's good for us. It's good for a lot of our tenants on the west side of the airport and in the business park. Even though air traffic is down, we have 1.3 million passengers who are going to be flying in and out of the Springs Airport this year, and a lot of them use Powers. We know it's chronically congested at airport. You've probably seen some of the first fruits of our new marketing campaign. There's some TV ads that are stressing time well spent as a reason to fly out of Colorado Springs. And that's really what we have to market is convenient, less stress alternative to Denver. And our value package really needs to be easy in, easy out, not just at the airport terminal, but the ground transportation infrastructure on the way in. Certainly we benefited from a lot of the improvements on the Powers corridor already. We just believe that this is the next logical step to widen Powers and support the ability to use Metro funding to do that in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment?
Do you have information on who those 1.3 million are and why they're coming here?
Can I have you guys get together offline after the meeting? Go to Councilmember Pico for final comment. Oh, yes. And once again, I forgot your name.
Noel Sawyer.
Thank you, Noel.
Okay. I know I don't look. I'm not.
Yeah. Look over there, and I know you're not Mayor Turley, so.
I do have two concerns, and hopefully this can be answered. Have we borrowed money from the maintenance fund previously? Has this ever been done?
Actually, that would be an RTA question, not a PPACG question.
Right.
That's not something this board gets to decide.
Well, have we done this before? Have we taken money from the maintenance fund and put it anywhere else?
Can I provide a quick answer to that?
Certainly.
This is, although there have been circumstances where we have borrowed money for emergencies, such as a bridge failure, this is not a borrowing of money, this is a budgeted item. And PPRTA board will actually be looking this afternoon at swapping two projects so that this becomes a capital project and the rehabbing of signals becomes a maintenance project. So
Okay, so we're,
it will actually be capital funds of PPRTA that will be placing on the Fillmore interchange if option A is selected.
so now you're taking money from two other projects just to,
No, I have, the city's budget has $1 million in their maintenance fund for the Fillmore interchange, but they also have in capital budget, they have $1 million for signal rehabs.
correct.
I'm simply going to move the signal rehabs over to the maintenance side, because that's really maintenance work, and then the $1 million for the grant match for Fillmore gets moved over to the capital side. So no projects get dropped off the budget because the budget's already approved with this $1 million. I'm just switching out the color of the money.
Okay.
Councilmember
Thank you.
Pico?
Before we go to the vote here, I just want to acknowledge it, recognize that it is the PPRTA board's decision on this, and we're not, well, on option A or option B. So, you know, we're making our vote here today, but it's going to go up to them. And just want to recognize their sovereign authority.
Thank you. With that, we will vote on the motion, which is option A as our preferred, and option B, excuse me, option B if necessary, to keep Fillmore on track time-wise. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Appreciate the discussion on that. Item 6B, TIP Amendment 17.
Good morning, Brian Vituli with PPACG's Transportation Program. We're asking for your approval of Amendment 17 to the 2013 to 2018 Transportation Improvement Program. CDOT sent us a request for two items. The first is to add a new project, and that's a surface treatment project of State Highway 85 from milepost 128 to 138. There's a map up here on the screen, if you can see it. Which you probably can't, but that defines the boundaries of State Highway 85, roughly from Fountain up to opposite of the B Street on the other side of I-25. The request is to add $4.74 million for the surface treatment project. Request number 2 is to add $8.63 million of faster safety funds between 2014 and 2015, and $242,000 of strategic funds in 2014 to fully fund the State Highway 21 or Powers Boulevard Old Ranch Road interchange completion project. Earlier, several months ago, we did a TIP amendment to add in dollars that were awarded through the RAMP program. State Highway 21 Old Ranch Road received $600,000 of RAMP funds, and these remaining dollars being added will fully fund this project. You can see the details for the requests in attachments 1 through 4. The proposed TIP table is seen in attachment 5. And attachment 6 is the draft resolution of approval. Both the TAC and the CAC recommended approval in April, and PPACG staff also recommends approval. Are there any questions?
Questions? Thank you. Councilmember Miller?
Just get an update on the timetable for the Powers and Old Ranch? Where are we at? Sorry to bring you up.
we're ready to go with that project, pending the final agreement with the city on the $8.6 million that the city is matching the project. So the agreement specifies a payback period of that $8.6 million to CDOT over a 6-year period. And so once that agreement's signed, we can advertise the project. It's ready to go in terms of design, right-of-way environmental clearance.
Thank you.
I have a question for CDOT on the Highway 85. Some portions of that are relatively new, particularly around Highway 16. Is it contemplated to resurface all of it, or only those portions
Yeah, that's
necessary?
That's a good question, Mr. Chairman. It's not the entire length.
Okay.
Those are the limits of the project,
Okay.
the extreme limits, but there's actually 3 work zones within that area. So you pointed out something where we're not going to rework something we've done recently.
Thank you. And second point, I know on Main Street and on Fontaine, CDOT maintains control to the east side of the railroad tracks. And I'm wondering if that is the case on Ohio Street in Fountain, and if so, will you be resurfacing that area as well? It needs it.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with those details.
Okay.
Mark, are you?
All I know is that it's mainly the south piece coming off of 16 up to a certain point where the roadway improves in terms of ride surface, and then it picks up north of Academy and goes to about B Street. So I don't know exactly where those limits are. But
Sharon, if I could encourage you to have Dwayne get with.
Can I take him on a ride?
If you could have the city and CDOT work together on that.
We can.
Okay. Any other questions? Call the roll. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. 6C, 2040 Regional Transportation Plan Evaluation Criteria Weighting. Brian, this one's yours as well.
Yes, it is. Thank you. We're asking for your approval of the evaluation criteria weighting to help us continue the development of our Chapter 5 planning framework. The planning framework just details the planning process that PPACG staff does to evaluate the projects, define goals, performance measures. Last month, you all approved the evaluation criteria. We then went to our committees last month to have them weigh the evaluation criteria. Now, the weighted results that you'll see later in your packet here, that's what's combined with a raw score of all of our member governments' projects that are submitted to us. So we combine those, the weights that you will approve today with the raw scores. That helps us get a prioritized list of projects to go down a list until we can't fund any more of them. So we always have more projects than we have funding. The prioritized list of projects will help us determine which projects get incorporated into our regional transportation plan. So as I mentioned, the TAC provided some weighted results at their April meeting. We had a workshop, a facilitated workshop with our Community Advisory Committee. They ended up providing results. You can see the results in Attachment 1. And as Mr. Baker said earlier, as in past years when we've done this, there's been a pretty clear difference between the TAC results and the CAC results. This is one of the first times that the results were actually very, very close together. You can see option 1, that's the CAC recommendation. Option 2 is the TAC recommendation. What PPACG staff is recommending, since the results are so close together, is to average both the TAC and the CAC's results, and you can see those results in option 3. And this is in keeping with what the board has done in the past. Several times we've had discrepancies like this, and the board has just averaged both results, but in this case, it's a very, very fine difference between the results. I do have a graphic which is in color, which I'm not sure if you can see, but if you go to the bottom 4 criteria, again, the column on the left is the CAC results, in the middle is the TAC, and the staff results, which is the averaging, is on the right. The bottom 5 actually criteria are all the same between all the options. All the way at the top, maintenance still comes out as the most important evaluation criteria. So you can see there's very little difference. And you as the board, of course, you can pick from those 3 options. You can either choose the CAC results, the TAC results, or PPACG's results, which is an average of them all.
I move for option 3.
Second.
Clerk and Recorder Williams?
I'd like to have some discussion on that, because I think there's a fourth option.
Now's the time.
Because this is, so when we had all the discussion about all these criteria, we talked about this is the stage at which we would actually make the decisions about what's important. So, yes, we have to include all of these fine things on there. But if you look at everything below level, and just pick a number 6 down or whatever, you have things that, because of the way these are developed, you get averages. Averages tend to near each other. And so you wind up with the lower ranked things not very far away from the higher ranked things in value. So, and I'll pick the bottom one there. Wildlife habitat's 3.6. So, and mobility is 11.4, which is about 3 times the level. I don't think that's the right ratio, because to me, if you have 4, if you were just using these as part of the analysis, these 4 items, and you said, well, mobility is worth 3 points, and the Preble's jumping mouse is worth 1 point, that is nowhere near the right ratio. And I think this system, where everybody votes and you come up with your weighted averages, results in things kind of clumped together. And I think we need more disparity between the things we think are valuable. Our region is constantly screaming to CDOT, we need to look at mobility. And yet we're going to say that's 11% of what you should look at? Well, if this is how we rank things, we shouldn't be very surprised if CDOT comes up with a similar response to say, well, it's not that important. You only rank it as 11% of the importance. And so, like, I can't make motions. I've got 3 commissioners here. But if it were up to me, I would have everything from 6 down and add all those points to the things that are really important. So you actually got some wide disparity between these, because these are so close together that the difference between most of them is almost insignificant. And you're essentially ranking everything pretty close to each other. And I don't think that's the way we should be looking at the needs of this area. That wildlife habitat, infill redevelopment, stormwater, air quality, economic vitality, adverse impact reduction, environmental justice. We talk about what, I don't think things have changed since I was knocking on doors when I was running. And people didn't talk to me about, I am concerned about the Preble's jumping mouse. I am concerned about infill. I'm concerned about any of these factors. They talked about, I can't get to my kid's soccer game in time, or the road's not safe, or there's potholes everywhere. And so you look at those 3 upper factors of preserving the system, mobility, and safety, and they're barely more highly rated than things that, at least as I knocked on doors, I didn't find people expressing their concerns about. So that's my input. You can do what you want with it, but we'll continue to advocate for mobility at the state level, even if you guys say it's only worth 11% of the criteria.
Mayor Snyder?
Well, thank you for your opinion, Clerk and Recorder.
Thanks for sharing.
If I were in charge, I guarantee it would look a lot different than it does right now. And I think there's a lot of people that support those lower leveled ones. I had a question, though. So the board will retain absolute authority. This is a guide. This is a metric which we can evaluate transportation projects by. But this board and future boards will always have the authority to disregard this, for lack of a better term, and make a decision, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Other comments? Questions? Anyone in the audience? Commissioner Clark?
I think that this is kind of, it's not necessarily perfect, but I do think it balances, and I do think wildlife is important. I don't know that this says Endangered Species Act specifically on wildlife habitat. This talks about the environment, and I think that I know that my constituents, of which Mayor Snyder's one of them, appreciate us taking those kinds of environmental concerns into consideration. Well, I did want to ask, what is environmental justice? I've forgotten.
See what the official
I
definition is
brought
here.
another graphic for you also. If you remember this.
Oh, please don't. Can you just tell us what that means?
Yes.
Eminent domain avoidance.
I did not bring my binoculars with me today.
Yeah, environmental justice, the definition for that was in this long matrix that you approved last month. It's projects that are expected to have a transportation impact on minorities, citizens with disabilities, low incomes.
Okay. That answers my
needs.
question. I appreciate that. And I'm comfortable with the motion, so.
Yeah, I had the same question and digging back into it, and what resonated with me was eminent domain avoidance. So that in light of, yeah.
Any other discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Moving to information items, 7A, CDOT statewide transit presentation. Who do we have handling that? 7A. Jump to 7B.
Oh, okay. Good morning. My name is Tracy McDonald, and I'm with CDOT's Division of Transit and Rail, and I'm responsible for developing CDOT's first statewide transit plan. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that this morning, but before that, we also have Craig Blewett with Mountain Metro Transit. For this region, he and the other Craig are working on this region's transit plan, which will be integrated into our plan. So I thought it would be good to have him talk a little bit about.
We have too many drives
Gadgets.
and not enough space on the computer. Let's see if I can do it now.
We ran out of letters.
I think that's Venice, but I'm not.
Somewhere nice.
Oh, if it's Venice, it's not that many.
We just ran out of letters.
They use that water for.
Well, you might not have your slides, but.
It's okay, I can just talk.
Okay.
I'll just talk, I only have 4 slides.
Sorry.
Thanks, Tracy. Craig Blewett, Transit Services Manager with City of Colorado Springs and Mountain Metropolitan Transit. This is really focusing on the statewide transit plan today, but the statewide plan really looks at the overarching needs and objectives of the entire state and looks at connectivity across different regions of the state. And there's also a composite of all the regional transit plans that are developed across the state. So for the Pikes Peak region, we're just kicking off now our regional transit plan efforts. It's really a joint effort between Mountain Metropolitan Transit and Pikes Peak Area Council of Governments. There's actually two separate transit plans. One is the regional transit plan that's they're both really components of the overall 2040 plan for the Pikes Peak region. But one is really focuses on transit, conventional transit. The other one focuses on coordinating the specialized transit efforts for persons who are elderly and have disabilities. So one is more of a coordination effort for how those different services work together, and the other one focuses on more conventional transit. Mountain Metropolitan Transit is the project manager for the transit plan, and PPACG is the project manager for that coordination of specialized transit plan. But we're working together, and we've hired the same consulting group to handle both plans. So they're both coordinated, and they're intended to work mutually supportive of each other, and then will be stitched in, once it's completed, be stitched into the state plan. So just want to address that part in terms of our regions here as Tracy goes forward talking about the statewide efforts.
Well, sorry for the lack of presentation. It was a very pretty one. So I apologize, but I will just work from my sheet and kind of run through what I was going to talk about. So CDOT's Division of Transit and Rail was created in 2009 by state legislation. And one of the things that we are responsible for is developing a state passenger rail and transit plan. We've already done the passenger rail plan, and we are now focusing on a statewide transit plan. And it's really taking a look at the state as a whole and trying to provide the connectivity between all of the different local systems that are out there. So that is really one of the main reasons why we're doing a state transit plan. But also, we want something, because of having a new division and the ability to operate, finance, maintain, and oversee transit in the state, we really want to have a framework for moving forward with an integrated system for the state. And really setting direction and policies around transit and having a framework in which to develop strategies and projects to develop an integrated system. And so part of that, we created a vision for transit for the state, as well as identified some goals and objectives. So I will read you the vision, since I don't have it in front of you. But the vision that we came up with, and this was working with a statewide steering committee, of which Craig is part of. We had people from all around the state contribute to advising us on developing the plan, and one of the first things we did was to develop a vision and the supporting goals and objectives. So the vision we came up for transit was Colorado's public transit system will enhance mobility for residents and visitors in an effective, safe, efficient, and sustainable manner. Will offer meaningful transportation choices to all segments of the state's population and will improve access to and connectivity among transportation modes. So to support that vision, we developed 6 supporting goals. We have system preservation and expansion, mobility and accessibility, transit system development and partnerships, environmental stewardship, economic vitality, and safety and security. And for each of those goals, we identified several objectives, which will ultimately lead to projects, and we also have performance measures to circle back around and make sure those projects are meeting the visions and the goals and objectives that we established. So our overall schedule for the statewide transit plan is about 18 months. We started last April and began with data collection, and then also started working with the 10 rural areas of the state to develop their transit plans. So the MPOs and the urban areas developed their own, and we're helping the rural areas. And that was April timeframe. In fall, we held, 17 public open houses in the rural areas and gathered some input. And we also worked through transit working groups in each rural area to develop the vision goals and start looking at the needs in each of those areas. So this spring, where we are now, is we're reaching out in the urban areas, where we're going to each of the 5 MPO areas to develop get input on the statewide plan. And in fall, we expect to, summer, we will adopt our statewide transit plan, which will then be integrated into the overall CDOT statewide transportation plan, which is a multimodal plan. So in the statewide plan, not only will we incorporate the regional transit plans from the rural areas and the urban areas, but we'll also look at transit needs from the state perspective. So we'll take what we've heard in the different areas of the state in terms of local needs, regional, interregional, but look at how that connects at a state level. We also are doing some funding analysis, so we're looking at what's the funding situation, how much money do we have, are there potential other sources, and how do we leverage the sources we have to make the most for the transit system. We'll also integrate some other studies. DTR has a few studies underway that will be incorporated into the statewide plan, as well as input from stakeholders. And out of this, we hope to have some implementation actions that actually sets direction for what we want to do at a statewide level to enhance transit. So like I mentioned, we've been helping the rural areas with their plans. Those will be done in the next few months and will be rolled into the regional transportation plans. And then we'll take, once the MPO plans are done, we'll incorporate that into the statewide plan. And the regional plans look at the same thing, basically identifying the characteristics of the region, what's unique about the region, what are the transit needs, and then also coming up with strategies to move forward. And we'll have short-term, mid-term, and long-term strategies in those areas. So as I mentioned, we've done a lot of stakeholder involvements. We had all the open houses in the rural areas. We're doing the urban areas now. We had transit working group meetings, so we've really done quite an extensive outreach to gather information and make sure all the strategies, the visions, things like that we're developing have been reviewed by stakeholders, especially transit providers, human service agencies, and those who really need transit services, so the transit-dependent populations. We do have a website dedicated to the transit plan, and we post all the information there. We also have comment forms online, as well as a GIS-based comment tool, so we've tried to provide opportunity for people to submit information or comments or ask questions as best we can. Over the public involvement that we've done, there were a few things that we've heard pretty much in every single area, and including we had a meeting in Denver and a meeting in Greeley last week. But the one thing we're hearing is a need for more operating funds and the flexibility within the operating funds. We also have heard the need for coordinating transit so that there's the ability for more people to use one bus rather than 3 buses going to the same location from 3 different operators. We've also heard the need for more regional and intercity transit and the connectivity among those. So a lot of times people can get around in their local communities but can't get from the eastern edge of the state to the urban corridor. So those are some of the things that we're looking at. In terms of the other studies that we're going to be integrating, there is the interregional connectivity study, which looked at high-speed rail along the Front Range between Fort Collins and Denver and Colorado Springs and Denver, and also Golden to DIA. There's also the Mountain Corridor and Advanced Guideway System study that also looked at high-speed transit from Eagle into Denver, so that will roll into that statewide picture, as well as a recent bus and network study. So that looked, again, a statewide look. It looked at regional, intercity, and essential services, and really looked at where there were gaps around the state and how basically set up these are the services that really could be implemented, not in the near term, so it's definitely a long-term plan. But out of that also came the interregional express bus service, which I don't know if many of you are familiar with that. It'll be the service that CDOT will actually operate, and it connects Fort Collins with Denver, Colorado Springs and Denver, and Glenwood Springs and Denver. And that will be starting up in 2015, early in 2015. And the idea was really to connect those urban centers and connect areas where there was already a good, strong local transit system to make start making those connections between an interregional service and local service. Let's see, what else? We did do an elderly and disabled survey around the state, so that was done in October. We got 3,000 responses, and it was both mailed out through other state agencies as well as the mailing list we had, and we also had an online survey form. And we asked how people got around, if they used transit, and if not, what were some of the barriers to transit. And some of the barriers were lack of service where needed and limited service time. So those were two of the key issues. And people also expressed the need for wanting better information about transit and the connectivity among transit. This survey was done, like I said, for the state, but we did break it down by transportation region, so we do have data that's just germane to this area. So if anyone's interested in that survey, I can certainly provide it. So that we're also taking that information to work into our strategies for the statewide system. In terms of funding, as part of our analysis, we're looking at what the major sources of funding are in the state, and it's really Federal Transit Administration, monies at the local level, as well as the Department of Human and Health Services. So those are the largest chunks, but there are about 80 different sources of money for transit. It's just little pockets of money, though, and so really the idea would be, in terms of coordination, is how can those funds be leveraged. So that's one thing that we'll look at from the statewide perspective. And that is basically what I wanted to share with you. Like I said, we hope to have the regional plans done in the next month or so, the state plan done this summer, and then integrated into CDOT's overall transportation plan by this winter. So are there any questions or comments?
Anybody have any questions? I have a couple. Could you send that
Yes.
PowerPoint to staff and then get it out to the board? That would be great.
I will do that.
And I really want to believe in your process, okay? But, I'm starting to see a pattern over my years up here, which is we do these statewide studies and we get everybody involved, and then the money ends up going to the I-70 corridor. Okay, so, and that's kind of the perception I'm getting now, is this is a process so that we can build a train from DIA to the Ski Mountains, service the Denver area. I'm wondering, you mentioned some of the studies along the Front Range, which I think would be certainly more important to the vast majority of state residents as opposed to that limited I-70 corridor, which is also very important, I understand. Is there any assurance you can give us here that a north-south route will be given at least equal consideration to an east-west route through Denver?
I think so, yes. Because both of those, at least from the high-speed rail perspective, are very, very long-term. As part of the interregional connectivity study, which focused more on the Front Range, the minimum operating segment, which would consider to be the first phase, was actually from Denver south. So, that had the most ridership, was the most economically viable. Not that any of them are terribly viable right now. There's just no funding. But so both of those sort of fall into that long-range vision. In terms of the near, like the short-term time frame, I think this plan will have implementation actions. So some of it may be very simple things of just trying to coordinate local systems with, some of the interregional systems. But I think one of the good starting points is that bus network study that we did, because it looked at all levels of service, and basically for every area of the state looked at, every region in the state, we at least could identify 2 to 3 routes that would be needed. And all of those, the idea was to connect with existing systems. Yeah. So that people could get places without having to spend like 3 overnights somewhere because of the schedule.
Okay. So. And then one last question. I'm having a little trouble envisioning exactly what rural transit is.
Well, it's mostly on demand, like demand response. So someone calls up and a van comes and picks them up and takes them where they want to go. So it's typically county-based. So like Prowers County has a service, and it covers the entire county, and we'll do special trips for,
It's not specialized transit?
Basically,
okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Some of it is general public, but it'll serve either like the town of La Junta or do one-day trip to other areas of the county, but it's usually not fixed route where there's a stop that one can get on.
Thank you. Anybody else have any questions?
So, again, sorry for the technical difficulties.
Well, you handled it really well. So.
The open house. Oh, yes, one last thing. We are having an open house tonight here in this room from 5:30 to 7. So if anyone wants to see the presentation, or a slightly different presentation, they can come back at 5:30.
Oh, joy. You mean 7 hours in this room isn't enough for one day?
Well, you might as well make it the full day. So, yes. So, all right, well, thank you.
Very much. Okay, we can move on then to item 7B. 2040, moving forward, financial plan.
It's not quite good afternoon. Good morning again. The financial plan is sort of relates to your earlier item, the funding that's available, reasonably expect to be available for through the 2040 plan. Working with CDOT, hopefully we will get some numbers from CDOT. Until then, actually tomorrow at TAC, we took the 2035 forecast, created a high and low sort of two, like a band of reasonability. TAC will discuss that tomorrow. Also, the second part of this is calling for projects. Today, we are officially going to put out a legal ad that says we're calling for projects to include in our 2040 plan. The applications are the basic same applications as the last time. In fact, we sent the applications back out to all the staff at your local entity so they can basically turn them around and resubmit them with the cosmetic changes 2035 to 2040. Also looking for additional projects because some of our big ones got knocked off. The I-25, Cimarron, Filmer, those are going to be knocked off. That's going to free up some funding for those projects. So with that, I expect next month to have something related to funding numbers in an information type way. Any other questions?
I don't have a question for you. I had a question maybe for Tom Verona. I've heard that CETA doesn't really want groups just resubmitting the 2035 plan. Do you have any light to shed on that? I mean,
Well, it seems like there's a lot of effort underway to try and look at what the needs are today. So, the needs do change. As Craig said, some projects have been completed and are removed from the list. It's always a good opportunity to revisit your priorities and needs and get the community and all your members involved in the process. So I don't necessarily see why you'd want to resubmit something that, I know you put a lot of work into it years ago.
2011.
Obviously, pretty comprehensive, but it needs some dusting off. I'm sure there's some great projects on that old list still that haven't been addressed yet.
There are.
And this is due when?
A month from June. June 19th. Yeah, it's due I think the Thursday of TAC meeting in June, so a month, which is actually half the time we had last time, but under the compressed schedule working, that's where we're at.
Which doesn't leave a lot of time for revisiting and public process or any of that. So,
but we are going to work with CEDA. In the old plan, we had like US 24 as a total corridor, Powers Central is a total corridor. We're going to work with CEDA to come up with more bite-sized pieces of those corridors instead of just looking at the whole. Because we're not going to get $240 million for 24 West. So what's a $10 million or a $30 million? What are projects we can make that are benefit high life cycle cost effectiveness?
So you'll get responses back from the member entities.
Yes.
And you'll collate all that together.
Score like mad.
Right, and it's a pretty rapid process.
It's literally the application time is half, the scoring time is a third of what we had last time. So
the word is, get your staffs going and get those projects in and confirm at least what's already in there. And if you have other changes or other priorities have changed, make sure those are identified.
Yeah, we've already started scoring or modeling running the model to score some projects we know are going to get resubmitted. So just to get ahead of it as much as we can. So,
thank you. Any questions for Craig?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And that moves us on to item 7C, the stack agenda.
Mr. Chairman, sometimes the second Friday is before the second Wednesday, and that's what happened in this case. So this is the report as to what happened at STAC. You've got the agenda. Let me talk about three major things here. First, a critical factor for Craig's discussion of is there money for a large project depends on what happens with Senate Bill 228. When Senate Bill 1 was eliminated, which was sales tax funding from cars going to transportation, they replaced it with a short-term funnel to transportation if a host of criteria occurred. And so it involves growth in real income that doesn't trigger a Tabor cap. And there is belief that the state may meet that in the next couple of years. The legislature did not take that money away this session because it wasn't going out this session. They were concentrating on this money. So there's concern that a future legislature might eliminate it entirely, or we might hit a Tabor cap, or we don't hit the income growth projection. But if none of those things happen, there is a significant amount of money that is supposed to come into CDOT for strategic projects. Now, not enough to cover all the strategic projects in the 7th pot list and the 28 strategic corridors approved by the voters, and not enough to address all the other needs that exist around the state, but there is the possibility we could get some significant projects done. Which leads directly into the next item on the agenda, which is the I-70 viaduct, which could take every single penny of 228 funds and leave nothing for anywhere else. There's a $600 million fix-in-place option, but the way environmental impact statements typically work as you're going through and looking at it, everybody comes up with their preferred alternative, and no one has to look at what the impact is on funding on the rest of the state. And so what is coming out of the process is a beautiful project where you lower I-70 instead of making it above the area, which is a bridge and costs money to maintain, they lower it 35 feet below ground level, which allows them to put the bridges over and also have parks on top. And so this cut and cover option would take about $1.7 billion. Keep in mind that's more than CDOT's entire budget. And would suck it all up. Am I off by $100 million there, Norm? Am I off by $100 million?
Good. Well, 1.8, I think, was, but yeah.
Okay.
But what's $100 million?
What's $100 million amongst friends?
The rounding error.
Well, and the issue becomes that they've got this great project, and it's a beautiful project, and it preserves all these nice things, but it sucks up a lot of money. And so that was an item for discussion, and certainly as the rest of the state looks at that, saying, hey, that's great that you've got this wonderful idea, but Pueblo's got a wonderful idea of how to fix I-25. That's how much, Tom? $500 million?
It's 0.75 billion.
Okay.
Roughly.
So $750 million. We've of course got Powers and eights or Cimarron to the west, or Highway 24, however you want to call it. There's all sorts of projects around, and if you have all of it going to this one project, and part of it is there's a high threshold, because if you're going to, you can't just lower 150 feet of it. You have to lower a whole amount at one time. And so that was a large discussion. The final discussion dealt with these formulas that we talked about and for regional priorities programs. You guys, I think, all have planning commissions on, and so Stack threw a little bit of a temper tantrum. How dare the Transportation Commission not listen to us? And by that we meant not agree with us as a body. But it is an advisory committee, so it doesn't have the right to dictate. And so they decided that they would do a reaffirmation of their support for the proposal that went through, and this time, based on our instructions and instructions from other boards, 3 of the areas disagreed with the reaffirmation of their request, and those were Dr. Cog, Pikes Peak, and Pueblo. And so there were 3 no votes for their reaffirmation of keep the formula with the formula we agreed to, with the 3 of us explaining our concerns with where they were. So that's where we are. Transportation Commission is meeting today.
Well,
Yeah.
workshop this afternoon and regular meeting tomorrow morning.
So tomorrow morning they're anticipated to make the decision as to set on the agenda, Tom?
It is for the decision of the program distribution,
Okay.
how the funding formulas for both the RPP and
Okay.
faster safety.
Yeah, so that is the discussion that's going on. They reaffirmed their position with this time 3 dissenting votes. So
Is it your understanding they may be approving the viaduct project tomorrow?
No.
Okay.
No, this was a long-term discussion item.
How is it that the viaduct project has a specific budget and nobody else has even gotten the request for projects?
Well, it's their. We have specific dollar items in ours. In fact, they're right in the document Craig passed out for the last agenda item. So we have how much it would cost to finish Powers, we have an environmental impact clearance. So that's the stage they're at. They're in the environmental impact stage. And the EIS stage, they've been going on now for more than a decade to try and come up with an agreed proposal that keeps everybody happy and avoids adversely impacting any of the adjoining properties.
Thank you. Yes, Craig.
So one of the differences between our projects and the Viaduct project, though, is CDOT staff has been providing the commission with budget. Here's how you could budget the project. If you take 34 years' worth of the bridge funds and take the 228 funds and all these, so CDOT staff is actively telling the commission how to budget the project.
That and the fact there's a few extra zeros.
Yeah, that's a big change.
Now, I will say one other factor, which is the viaduct, unless something is done, isn't going to last, according to projections, more than a decade. And so they have to...
Right, it's hard to argue the need for the project.
So something has to be done, but something doesn't necessarily translate to the option that everybody immediately adjacent to it would like. And that's the funding tension that takes place, is how much do we just repair in place? Do we rebuild in place? Or do we do something fairly radical, which is completely change the topography? And that's, as they do their environmental impact, they're essentially asking the people that live around them and not the people who live 100 miles away in Lincoln County to say, how much are you willing to pay for this? And there are some options that are going to look at some funding by adding managed lanes coming from a public-private partnership.
Right, and Dr. Cog is also a partner in that funding piece.
So, yeah, so they're not talking about all of it coming from CDOT, but it will have a significant impact on
The next 25 years of transportation funding?
Yes. Yep.
And just, if I could, just a little bit of history. When we did have Senate Bill 1 funding, Wayne alluded to the fact that the EIS is still underway. Well, you didn't have it environmentally cleared with NEPA, so no money could have been spent on the corridor back then when the funding was available. So it has been somewhat left out.
They did pass around the current strategic projects list. I think there's 7 of those 28 that aren't done. The largest portion of that is the Eagle County Airport to DIA, which is a $2 billion. So it is in the 28 strategic corridors. I'm not arguing that at all. What that meant, if you spent almost all of that in this urban area, there would be nothing for going up into the mountains. And so there's some...
So working both ends, how many linear miles are we talking about for the viaduct project?
No, it's more than 1.
But there's several alternatives with varying lengths and varying funding sources as well. It could extend all the way to Pena Boulevard, is my understanding, but that would involve the managed lanes concept, and a private partnership would be necessary as well. And
private, do I read that to mean toll?
Tolling, bonding.
Yep.
Yeah.
Which is why, as in the legislative update, which I skipped over, CDOT's concerned, obviously, when legislators try and say, well, you can't use public-private partnerships without going through all these additional steps. They just did in a legislation triggered by 36. Of course, the reason CDOT's looking at these is because of the $2 billion increase in the state budget from last year. Transportation got $700,000. So there's a little bit of a discrepancy as to where the states. So the legislators sent the money to places other than transportation, and then say, but you can't get money from public-private partnerships either, so I don't know where that leaves CDOT as to how you build stuff. I guess they could apply for, Bill Gates to, just out of the goodness of his heart, send a couple billion, but...
Maybe Mr. Anschutz, he's a little more local.
There might be possibilities.
Well, thank you. Any questions for Wayne? And with that, item 9 is just upcoming meetings, and if there's no further business before the board, please. Oh, please.
Just one announcement. NACO is presenting a overview and an assessment of the upcoming MAP 21 extension legislation. As you know, MAP 21 expires in September of this year. Two proposed. One is by the administration called Grow America, separate legislation that probably will not be funded, but this one is more likely. It's a MAP 21 extension program. There's a conference call on Friday, day after tomorrow, at 11 a.m., and PPACG is going to host that conference call. If you'd like to come and hear the discussion of what MAP 21 for 6 years out might look like, you're welcome to attend.
Yep, with the email. Good. It'll be upstairs conference room, I think, starting at 11, our time.
Any other announcements? Anything for the good of the order? And we are adjourned. Thank you. Oh, you saw that? I saw it.
Switch back.
Ryan's really sucked. Total waste of